Stone does not forget. Beneath shifting sands, dense forests, and forgotten plateaus, ancient structures remain precise, aligned, engineered, with a level of intent that still challenges modern explanation. Archaeological evidence confirms their age, yet questions about their construction purpose and sudden abandonment continue to drive research and debate. From megalithic architecture and underground chambers to lost ritual complexes and unexplained artifacts, these ancient mysteries are not myths, they are documented discoveries. What technologies were truly available? How were massive stones transported, carved, and positioned with mathematical accuracy? And why do similar patterns appear across distant civilizations? This exploration of ancient archaeology, lost civilizations, and forbidden history examines real evidence, scientific analysis, and unresolved questions that continue to reshape our understanding of the ancient world. Rising above the Khorat Plateau in northeastern Thailand, Phu Phrabat Historical Park is not defined by towering temples or massive city walls. It is defined by stone, by wind-carved sandstone outcrops that resemble mushrooms, balanced pillars, and natural archways. At first glance, the landscape appears geological rather than archaeological. Yet beneath these sculpted rock formations lies a record of human activity spanning more than 3,000 years. What makes Phu Phrabat exceptional is not a single monument, but the continuity of sacred use. The site preserves a rare, layered history in which prehistoric communities, early historic societies, and later Buddhist practitioners all interacted with the same natural formations, reinterpreting them without erasing what came before. Geologically, the park sits on sandstone formed during the Mesozoic era. Over immense spans of time, differential erosion sculpted the bedrock into free-standing columns and bulbous capstones. Softer layers wore away more quickly than harder strata, creating the characteristic mushroom rocks that seem improbably balanced. These formations are entirely natural, yet many appear almost architectural. Flat undersides form ready-made shelters. Overhangs create shaded chambers. Narrow passages open into concealed spaces. For prehistoric communities, such formations offered immediate advantages. Rock shelters provided protection from monsoon rains and intense sun. Elevated terrain allowed visibility across the surrounding plateau. More importantly, these unusual shapes likely carried symbolic power. In many early cultures, striking natural features became focal points of ritual. Phu Phrabat's geology offered not just refuge, but present stone forms that seemed animated, distinctive, and worthy of attention. Archaeological evidence confirms that human groups occupied or used this landscape during the late prehistoric period. Within several shelters, red ochre paintings have been discovered on interior rock surfaces. These pictographs depict human figures, animals, and abstract motifs. Though not as densely painted as some other Southeast Asian sites, the imagery suggests ceremonial or symbolic intent rather than casual decoration. The pigments derived from iron-rich minerals have endured for millennia in protected recesses of the stone. The paintings are typically dated to roughly 3,000 years ago, placing them in the late Bronze Age to early Iron Age of mainland Southeast Asia. This period witnessed expanding trade networks, technological innovation in metallurgy, and increasing social complexity. Yet the communities who left these images at Phu Phrabat did not build monumental stone cities. Instead, they marked and reused the landscape itself. The absence of large constructed architecture is not evidence of simplicity, but of a different cultural strategy, one that embedded belief directly into natural formations. As centuries passed, the plateau did not fall silent. During the Dvaravati period, and later the Khmer cultural horizon, roughly between the 8th and 12th centuries CE, the site entered a new religious phase. Buddhism spread widely across mainland Southeast Asia during this era, often integrating earlier sacred spaces into its expanding network of pilgrimage and devotion. At Phu Phrabat, natural rock shelters were subtly modified to function as shrines. Rather than leveling the terrain or constructing massive, freestanding temples, builders incorporated the existing stone into religious architecture. Stone bases, boundary markers, and traces of brick or laterite structures appear within and around the shelters. Carved Buddha images and sacred footprints were placed beneath overhangs that already resembled protective roofs. Inscriptions and sculptural fragments indicate the presence of organized religious activity. This adaptive approach is critical to understanding the site's importance. Phu Phrabat demonstrates how Buddhist communities did not always impose monumental transformation upon a landscape. Instead, they recognized the spiritual authority already attributed to certain places and aligned new doctrine with established sacred geography. The result is a palimpsest prehistoric art beneath medieval devotion, geological form beneath both. Local folklore adds yet another layer. Many rock formations bear names connected to a legend of a princess confined among the stones. Features are identified as her bed, her throne, or chambers of her exile. While these stories are not historically verifiable, they reveal an enduring pattern. Each generation reinterprets the stones through its own narrative framework. Myth does not replace archaeology. It coexists with it, illustrating how landscapes accumulate meaning across time. From a research perspective, Phu Phrabat offers insight into long-term cultural continuity in mainland Southeast Asia. Unlike urban archaeological sites that reflect a single dominant era, this park preserves evidence of repeated evolving engagement. The prehistoric paintings show early ritual marking. The Buddhist modifications demonstrate doctrinal adaptation. Folklore records communal memory. The stones themselves remain unchanged, yet their meanings shift. The site also challenges conventional expectations of what constitutes a major archaeological complex. There are no towering pyramids or vast defensive walls. Instead, significance emerges from distribution dozens of small ritual points scattered across a forested plateau. This spatial pattern suggests a sacred landscape rather than a centralized temple compound. Ritual activity may have been dispersed episodic and intimately connected to specific rock features, rather than to a singular monumental axis. Environmental context further enhances its value. The elevated sandstone ridge creates microclimates and drainage patterns distinct from the surrounding plains. Seasonal water flow would have influenced settlement patterns, while the visibility from higher ground may have reinforced symbolic associations with sky and horizon. In many early societies, high places functioned as liminal zones, transitional spaces between earthly and celestial realms. Phu Phrabat's topography fits this broader anthropological pattern. Importantly, the park's preservation allows modern observers to examine how natural geology can shape religious architecture without being replaced by it. The rock shelters demonstrate that sacred construction does not always mean building from scratch. Sometimes it means recognizing form within nature and framing it with minimal intervention. The balance between natural erosion and human adaptation is unusually visible here. Today, Phu Phrabat is protected as a historical park and recognized for its cultural value. Ongoing archaeological study continues to refine dating, interpret iconography, and understand settlement dynamics in the surrounding region. The site contributes to broader discussions about prehistoric art in Southeast Asia, regional Buddhist expansion, and landscape archaeology. The deeper significance of Phu Phrabat lies in perspective. It reminds us that monumental scale is not the only measure of civilizational achievement. A society's relationship with landscape can be as revealing as its ability to quarry and stack stone. Here, erosion created forms that invited interpretation. Human communities responded across millennia first, by painting later, by carving later still, by storytelling. Standing beneath one of the towering capstones, one can see three forces at work: geological time measured in millions of years, human ritual measured in thousands, and living memory measured in generations. Few archaeological sites preserve this convergence so clearly. Phu Phrabat does not overwhelm with size. It instructs with continuity. Its mystery is not supernatural. It is historical. Why did successive cultures return to the same outcrops? Why did they preserve earlier traces rather than erase them? The answer likely lies in perception, in the human tendency to identify meaning in distinctive natural forms. When stone appears balanced against gravity, when shadows create natural chambers, when elevation commands the horizon, imagination responds. Phu Phrabat Historical Park stands as evidence that sacred landscapes are often discovered, not manufactured. The sandstone was shaped by climate and time long before the first pigment touched its surface. Yet once marked, it entered cultural history, and once sanctified, it continued to attract devotion. For listeners seeking value beyond spectacle, the site offers a lesson in continuity. Civilization does not always advance by replacing the old. Sometimes it advances by reinterpreting it, layer upon layer, belief upon belief, while the stone endures. The Talaiot of Son Fornés, located near Montuiri on the island of Mallorca, is one of the most extensively researched structures belonging to the Talaiotic culture. This monument primarily dates to the Late Bronze Age, approximately the 9th to the 8th centuries BCE. The circular stone tower does not stand alone in the landscape. Rather, it forms the center of a settlement that provides rare, stratified archaeological evidence, allowing the reconstruction of a social development process that extended over many centuries in the Balearic Islands. Son Fornés is not an isolated ruin detached from its context, but a key case study for understanding power organization, economic structure, architectural thinking, and cultural transformation in Mediterranean island communities prior to Roman expansion. The Talaiot itself is a massive circular structure, assembled from large limestone blocks without the use of binding mortar. The stones were placed using cyclopean techniques, relying on weight friction and precise alignment to ensure long-term stability. The thick walls lean slightly inward, helping to distribute structural forces and maintain equilibrium for nearly 3 millennia. There are no elaborate decorative elements. The structure itself is the primary expression of technical competence. Inside the tower stands a substantial central stone pillar, formed by vertically stacked slabs, which functioned to support the roofing system. The roof beams, likely made of wood, once extended from the central pillar outward to the encircling wall. This structural organization demonstrates a profound understanding of load distribution and spatial calculation. The Talaiot is not a random accumulation of stones. It reflects deliberate design thinking, featuring circular geometry-controlled access and an interior space planned for long-term use. The construction of such a monument required large-scale labor coordination, the capacity to mobilize resources, and considerable technical knowledge. Quarrying limestone, transporting heavy blocks, and positioning them accurately all demanded collective organization. This surpasses the scale of activity typical of small kin-based households. From this, one may infer the existence of leadership mechanisms capable of directing manpower and controlling resources. Archaeological excavations show that the Talayot functioned as the center of a planned settlement, including residential buildings, storage facilities, and activity spaces arranged around it. Stratified layers document multiple phases of occupation, extending across centuries, reflecting changes in spatial organization and functional use. Large ceramic containers and designated storage areas demonstrate systematic accumulation and redistribution of agricultural produce. Faunal remains indicate an economy dependent on the husbandry of sheep, goats, and pigs, while archaeobotanical studies confirm the cultivation of cereals. Together, these elements form a mixed agro-pastoral economic model capable of generating surplus and maintaining stability. The central placement of the Talayot within the settlement structure suggests a role extending beyond defense. Its close architectural integration with surrounding buildings indicates that it served as a focal point of communal life, possibly hosting meetings, deliberations, or rituals connected to authority. Its monumentality and visibility from a distance reinforced its symbolic significance within the social landscape. Variations in building size and construction quality within the settlement suggest a degree of social differentiation. The mobilization of labor for large-scale construction implies the presence of leaders or groups with recognized authority. However, the absence of centralized palatial architecture suggests a power structure that may have been decentralized or community-based rather than a fully developed centralized state. During its development, Sun Fornés records significant transformations, particularly around the 6th to the 5th centuries BCE. Certain buildings were dismantled or modified, spatial layouts changed, and ceramic styles evolved. These shifts may relate to internal tensions, demographic fluctuations, or the influence of Mediterranean exchange networks in which Phoenician and Punic traders were active during this period. Nevertheless, the Talayot continued to stand and was integrated into the new social context, demonstrating both adaptability and enduring symbolic value. The construction techniques at Son Fornés reveal effective adaptation to the local environment. Readily available limestone was optimally exploited. The circular design evenly distributed stress, and the thick walls provided insulation against seasonally fluctuating Mediterranean climates. Storage capacity and resource management reflect long-term planning strategies aimed at mitigating scarcity risks. Sun Fornés stands out within the Talayotic world due to the richness of its archaeological documentation. The dense distribution of Talayots across Majorca and Menorca raises questions regarding the repeated construction of similar monuments. Such activity may represent territorial competition, assertions of identity, or a shared ideological framework that emphasized monumental architecture as a symbol of authority. At Son Fornés, architectural, economic, and stratigraphic data allow this issue to be approached through empirical evidence rather than speculation. Continuous occupation across centuries enables the reconstruction of demographic patterns, subsistence strategies, and architectural evolution within a prehistoric island context. Modern excavation methods, including detailed stratigraphic recording, zooarchaeological analysis, and ceramic typology studies, have helped refine the chronological framework of the Talayotic period and its transitional phases. The Talayot of Son Fornés is therefore not merely an ancient stone structure, but a material testimony to organizational capacity, technical competence, and social adaptation within an island community prior to Roman incorporation. Its significance lies not in sensational hypotheses, but in verifiable archaeological evidence, demonstrating how a prehistoric society engineered durability, sustained power structures, and navigated long-term transformation within the Mediterranean environment. The city gate discovered at Tel Dan in northern Israel is widely regarded as one of the earliest preserved examples of a true mud brick arch. Dated to approximately the 18th century BCE, during the Middle Bronze Age, the structure provides critical evidence for the architectural capabilities of Canaanite urban centers in the southern Levant. Far from being a simple defensive entrance, the Tel Dan Gate demonstrates advanced knowledge of construction geometry, load distribution, urban planning, and long-term structural durability. Archaeological excavations conducted in the 20th century revealed a large fortified settlement beneath later occupational layers. The gate complex belongs to a substantial earthen rampart system, typical of Middle Bronze Age Canaanite cities. These cities were characterized by glacis fortifications, massive sloping earthworks, reinforced with mud brick walls. The Tel Dan Gate was integrated into such a system, forming a monumental entryway into the city. The most significant feature of the gate is its triple-arched passage, constructed entirely of mud brick. Each arch forms a curved profile, composed of carefully shaped bricks, laid in successive horizontal courses that gradually incline inward, creating a corbelled yet fully arched form. Unlike post and lintel construction, which relies on horizontal beams, the arch distributes compressive forces along its curve into supporting sidewalls. This principle allows the structure to bear weight efficiently without internal supports. The Tel Dan arches are not Roman in form, nor are they later Near Eastern imitations. They predate classical stone arches by roughly 2 millennia. Their existence confirms that knowledge of arch construction in the Near East was established long before its extensive stone expression in later Mediterranean architecture. In Mesopotamia, mud brick vaults and arches are known from even earlier contexts, but the Tel Dan example is among the best preserved and clearest cases in the Levant. Construction materials were locally sourced. Mud brick composed of clay-rich soil mixed with organic temper, such as straw, was molded and sun-dried. While less durable than fired brick or stone, mud brick performs effectively in arid climates when maintained. The preservation of the Tel Dan arches is due in part to a critical historical decision. The gate was intentionally buried in antiquity. Excavation evidence indicates that sometime after its primary period of use, the gate passage was deliberately filled with earth and debris. This action effectively sealed and stabilized the arches. Rather than demolishing the structure, inhabitants covered it and constructed a new gate system nearby. Such behavior is consistent with Middle Bronze Age urban renewal patterns where older monumental elements were incorporated, decommissioned, or ritually sealed. The burial inadvertently preserved the arches for nearly 4,000 years. From an engineering perspective, the arches demonstrate a clear understanding of compressive load mechanics. Mud brick performs well under compression, but poorly under tension. An arch design ensures that forces are transferred downward and outward into thick flanking walls. The Tel Dan Gate's side walls are massive, anchoring the arch structure within the larger rampart. The triple-arched configuration also suggests sequential reinforcement, distributing stress across multiple passage segments rather than concentrating it at a single span. Urbanistically, the gate reflects organized city planning. Middle Bronze Age Canaanite cities were not random agglomerations of dwellings, but carefully structured fortified centers. Monumental gates served administrative, military, and symbolic purposes. They controlled access, monitored trade, and displayed civic power. Tel Dan's location near key water sources and trade corridors connecting inland Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Levantine coast made it strategically significant. The presence of a monumental gate aligns with its role in regional exchange networks. The gate also provides insight into construction labor organization. Large-scale mud brick architecture required coordinated workforce management, clay extraction, brick molding, drying, transport, and precise placement. The curved geometry of the arches implies planning, and possibly the use of wooden centering frameworks or temporary supports during construction, though direct evidence for such scaffolding has not survived. The consistency of brick alignment indicates standardized building procedures. Comparative archaeology reinforces the gate's importance. Arched and vaulted mud brick structures appear in earlier Mesopotamian sites, such as those in southern Iraq, where architectural experimentation with curved forms began during the 3rd millennium BCE. However, Tel Dan represents a Levantine adaptation within a fortified urban context. It demonstrates that architectural knowledge circulated across regions and was not confined to a single cultural core. The broader cultural setting of Tel Dan during the Middle Bronze Age was one of increasing urban complexity. Canaanite city-states developed fortified capitals, administrative hierarchies, and extensive trade links. Fortifications from this era across the Levant at sites such as Hazor and Ashkelon include glacis systems and monumental gateways, though not all preserve arches as clearly as Tel Dan. The Tel Dan example thus occupies a crucial position in reconstructing technological diffusion and regional building traditions. The arches challenge simplified narratives of architectural evolution. Traditional surveys often emphasize stone arches of the Roman period as milestones in structural engineering. Yet the Tel Dan gate confirms that fundamental arch principles were understood and applied in mud brick centuries earlier. The difference lies not in conceptual knowledge but in material choice and preservation bias. Stone survives. Mud brick rarely does unless buried. Tel Dan's preservation is therefore exceptional rather than anomalous. Archaeological dating of the gate relies on stratigraphy-associated ceramics and comparative typology. Pottery from the relevant layer corresponds to Middle Bronze Age two horizons, aligning the construction date with roughly 1800 BCE. No inscriptions directly describe the gate's builders, but material culture situates it firmly within Canaanite society. Beyond its structural innovation, the gate illustrates defensive strategy. Monumental gates in fortified cities often incorporated multiple chambers, angled approaches, and overhead platforms for surveillance. While the Tel Dan gate is simpler than later Iron Age multi-chambered gates in the Levant, its substantial mass and integration into ramparts reflect serious defensive intent. Importantly, there is no credible archaeological evidence suggesting anomalous or lost advanced technology. The engineering principles visible at Tel Dan are consistent with known Bronze Age construction capabilities. Skilled labor, accumulated practical knowledge, and empirical experimentation are sufficient to explain the arches' existence. The site does not require speculative explanations. Its significance lies in demonstrating how sophisticated Bronze Age urban engineering already was. In summary, the Tel Dan city gate arches represent a well-documented Middle Bronze Age architectural achievement. Their importance rests on 5 key foundations: early application of true arch mechanics in the Levant, integration within a complex fortified urban system, evidence of organized large-scale mud brick construction, preservation through intentional burial, and contribution to a broader re-evaluation of ancient Near Eastern architectural development. Rather than an isolated anomaly, the gate is a data point that clarifies how engineering knowledge spread and evolved across the ancient Near East. For scholars and informed audiences, Tel Dan provides measurable archaeological value. It expands understanding of Bronze Age, urbanism, structural mechanics in earthen materials, and the technological competencies of Canaanite societies. The arches are not mysterious in origin. They are significant because they are real, datable, and technically coherent within their cultural and historical framework. On a quiet sandstone ridge in the Kangra Valley of Himachal Pradesh, facing the snow-fed Dholavira range of the Himalayas, stands one of the least discussed, yet most intellectually provocative monuments of early medieval India, the Masroor rock-cut temples. Carved directly from a single outcrop of stone, the complex represents an extraordinary act of subtractive architecture, an approach in which builders did not assemble blocks, but instead removed vast quantities of rock to reveal an integrated architectural form hidden within. Most scholars date the complex to approximately the 8th century CE, based on stylistic analysis of its sculptural program and architectural form. Unlike better-known rock-cut sites, such as the Kailasa Temple at Ellora, Masroor is not embedded in a major political capital or extensively documented in inscriptions. This absence of epigraphic clarity has made the site both academically intriguing and historically elusive. The complex originally consisted of around 15 interconnected shrines arranged around a central sanctuary. The principal temple rises in the Nagara architectural style of North India, characterized by curvilinear shikaras, tower spires that ascend vertically in clustered formation. What makes Masroor remarkable is not simply that it is rock-cut, but that it replicates structural temple architecture in monolithic form. Every column, plinth, mandapa, and tower was carved from the living rock rather than constructed piece by piece. The engineering implications are significant. Carving downward and inward from a single mass requires meticulous planning. Artisans would have needed to determine load-bearing tolerances in advance, ensuring that the remaining stone could support the superstructure once surrounding material was removed. A miscalculation could have led to irreversible structural collapse. The fact that the complex remains largely intact, despite seismic events, including the destructive Kangra earthquake of 1905, suggests a sophisticated understanding of both stone behavior and architectural geometry. Inside the main sanctum are sculptural figures associated with Vaishnavite and Shaivite traditions, including depictions commonly identified as Rama Lakshmana and Sita alongside forms linked to Shiva. This iconographic plurality raises important questions. Was Masroor conceived as a Shaivite shrine later adapted for Vaishnavite worship, or did it function from the outset as a multi-sectarian sacred space? In early medieval India, religious traditions were often fluid rather than rigidly separated, and temple patronage could reflect layered theological identities rather than exclusivity. One of the most visually striking elements of the site is the large rectangular water tank directly in front of the temple facade. The tank mirrors the stone towers, creating a symmetrical reflection that amplifies the monument's verticality. While such tanks often served ritual purification functions in Hindu temple complexes, their placement at Masroor also contributes to symbolic cosmology. In Hindu metaphysical thought, the sacred mountain, often identified with Mount Meru, rises from primordial waters. The temple carved from the ridge reflected in the water below may have embodied a cosmographic diagram rendered in stone. Geographically, Masroor occupies a liminal space. It is not positioned deep in a trade metropolis, nor is it entirely inaccessible. The Kangra Valley historically connected routes between the plains of northern India and the Himalayan foothills. Its location suggests that the temple was not an isolated hermitage, but part of a broader cultural landscape shaped by pilgrimage, political authority, and regional devotional networks. Yet unlike many contemporaneous monuments, Masroor lacks clear dedicatory inscriptions naming its royal patron. The 8th century, in this region, saw the influence of local dynasties, including rulers associated with the Katok lineage, but direct attribution remains uncertain. This silence in the historical record has encouraged speculation, though academic consensus remains cautious. Absence of evidence is not evidence of mystery beyond explanation. Rather, it reflects the fragmentary survival of documentation. Architecturally, the facade of the principal shrine is carefully proportioned. Pillared mandapa transition toward the inner sanctum along a defined axial alignment. The clustered towers echo structural masonry temples of North India from the same period, demonstrating that the artisans were translating established design conventions into rock-cut form. This translation itself is significant. It suggests either that builders were trained in structural temple construction before applying their knowledge to monolithic carving, or that architectural drawings and models circulated across regions. The surface detailing varies across the complex. Some sections display refined sculptural articulation, while other areas appear less finished. Scholars have debated whether this reflects phased construction, interrupted patronage, or simple erosion over time. The site shows evidence of damage from natural forces, especially seismic activity, which complicates attempts to distinguish unfinished work from later deterioration. The 1905 Kangra earthquake caused substantial destruction across the region, and Masroor suffered visible damage. Portions of the superstructure collapsed, and sculptural elements were fractured. Nevertheless, the surviving core still conveys the monument's original ambition. The resilience of the rock-cut method, despite catastrophic ground movement, demonstrates the inherent stability of monolithic carving when compared to assembled masonry. Local oral tradition associates the temples with the Pandavas of the Mahabharata, claiming they were constructed in a single night. Such narratives are common in South Asian monumental folklore, attributing large-scale works to mythic heroes. While historically unverifiable, these stories reveal how communities interpret architectural scale as evidence of superhuman agency. The myth functions not as literal history, but as cultural acknowledgement of extraordinary craftsmanship. From a comparative perspective, Masroor expands the geographical map of Indian rock-cut architecture. Most major monolithic complexes, such as those at Ellora Ajanta or Elephanta, are concentrated in western and central India. Masroor demonstrates that the technological and artistic vocabulary of rock excavation extended into the Himalayan foothills. This challenges simplified regional narratives and suggests broader networks of artistic transmission during the early medieval period. The sandstone used at Masroor differs from the basalt typical of Deccan rock-cut sites. Sandstone is softer and easier to carve, but more vulnerable to erosion. Working with such material would have required precision to prevent flaking and long-term weathering damage. The decision to carve vertically projecting shikaras from sandstone reflects both confidence and risk. Today, the temples are protected by the Archaeological Survey of India and recognized as a monument of national importance. Conservation efforts aim to stabilize weakened sections while preserving the authenticity of the carved surfaces. As with many heritage sites, preservation must balance structural reinforcement with minimal intervention. What ultimately makes Masroor valuable is not an unresolved supernatural enigma, but its demonstration of technical ambition in a regional context that remains understudied. It embodies the translation of structural temple aesthetics into monolithic form. It reflects religious plurality within early medieval devotional culture. It reveals how sacred architecture can encode cosmology through orientation, reflection, and elevation. And it illustrates how engineering knowledge can survive through material performance even when written documentation does not. In the broader history of architecture, Masroor stands as evidence that innovation is not always centralized. Monumental experimentation occurred not only in imperial capitals, but also in peripheral zones shaped by local patronage and regional identity. The site invites reconsideration of how architectural knowledge circulated across the Indian subcontinent. The Masroor rock-cut temples do not depend on myth to command respect. Their significance lies in measurable craftsmanship, geological calculation, stylistic synthesis, and enduring structural integrity. Carved from a single mass of stone more than 12 centuries ago, they remain a silent but articulate testament to the intellectual and artistic capacities of early medieval India. Among the most arresting monuments at Chichen Itza stands a low, rectangular stone platform covered in rows of carved human skulls. Known as the Tsompantli or skull platform, it is one of the clearest material expressions of ritual sacrifice, political authority, and cultural transformation in the ancient Maya world. Far from being a sensational relic of brutality, it is a carefully constructed ideological monument, reflecting a period when northern Yucatan became a crossroads of Mesoamerican civilizations. The skull platform dates primarily to the Terminal Classic and early post-classic periods, roughly between the 9th and 10th centuries CE. This was a time of profound change across Mesoamerica. Many classic Maya cities in the southern lowlands were in decline, while Chichen Itza was rising as a dominant regional power. Its architecture reveals strong connections to central Mexico, often described as Toltec influence. Whether through migration trade networks, military alliances, or ideological exchange, Chichen Itza absorbed and reinterpreted artistic and ritual elements from distant regions. The Tsompantli stands as one of the most visible examples of this cultural synthesis. In earlier contexts, a Tsompantli was typically a wooden rack used to display the severed heads of sacrificial victims. Ethno-historic accounts and later archaeological evidence from central Mexico describe horizontal poles strung between upright posts through which skulls were pierced and mounted. These structures were temporary, organic, and subject to decay. At Chichen Itza, however, the concept was monumentalized. Instead of wood, builders created a permanent masonry platform whose sides are covered with relief carvings of skulls arranged in orderly rows. The transition from perishable rack to enduring stone monument is significant. It transformed a ritual act into a lasting architectural statement. The carvings themselves are deliberate and standardized. The skulls are shown in profile, pierced laterally, consistent with the method used to mount them on wooden poles. They are not randomly scattered. They form disciplined rows, emphasizing repetition and order. Interspersed among them are motifs of crossed bones and skeletal imagery. The message is not chaotic violence, but structured ritual. The repetition conveys institutional authority. Sacrifice was not a sporadic event, but an organized, sanctioned component of civic and religious life. Equally important is the platform's placement within the ceremonial core of Chichen Itza. It stands near the Great Ball Court, the largest known ball court in Mesoamerica. This spatial relationship is critical. The Mesoamerican ball game was more than recreation. It carried cosmological meaning. In Maya, art scenes depict decapitation associated with the game, where a severed head transforms into serpents or sprouting vegetation. The imagery expresses renewal through sacrifice. Death becomes generative, feeding the cycles of agriculture and cosmic order. The skull platform's proximity to the ball court suggests that some of the displayed heads may have been linked to ritualized ball game ceremonies, reinforcing a worldview in which life and death are interdependent forces. The monument also reflects broader shifts in political ideology. Chichen Itza's architecture from this period includes warrior columns, serpent imagery, and chakmul sculptures reclining figures that may have received offerings. These features echo traditions associated with central Mexican centers such as Tula. The skull platform fits within this martial visual language. By displaying skull imagery prominently in the ceremonial precinct, the city's rulers projected power and divine legitimacy. Public sacrifice demonstrated control over enemies and affirmed the ruler's role as intermediary between humans and gods. Yet it is essential to understand that sacrifice in Mesoamerica cannot be reduced to terror alone. In Maya cosmology, blood was a sacred substance. It nourished deities, sustained the sun, and maintained cosmic equilibrium. Rulers themselves performed bloodletting rituals, piercing their own bodies to offer life force to the divine realm. Human sacrifice, though, more extreme, operated within the same theological framework. The skull platform, therefore, symbolizes not only conquest, but obligation. It embodies the belief that the universe required nourishment, and that political authority carried ritual responsibility. Archaeological research provides additional nuance. Excavations at Chichen Itza have uncovered human remains in cenotes and ritual contexts, confirming that sacrificial practices were real and not merely symbolic. However, the precise scale of skull display on the Tzompantli remains uncertain. The carved skulls represent an idealized image of abundance and power. They do not necessarily correspond one-to-one with actual victims. The platform may have served both commemorative and didactic purposes, memorializing past sacrifices while projecting the potential for future ones. Another layer of complexity lies in the question of identity. The term Toltec has long been used to describe the central Mexican stylistic elements at Chichen Itza, but modern scholarship approaches this label cautiously. Rather than assuming a simple invasion or conquest, researchers increasingly view the site as a product of dynamic interaction across regions. Trade routes connected the Maya lowlands to central Mexico and beyond. Ideas, symbols, and ritual practices circulated along with goods. The skull platform illustrates how Chichen Itza integrated these influences into its own architectural vocabulary, creating something locally distinct yet broadly connected. From a construction standpoint, the monument also demonstrates logistical organization. The platform required quarrying, transporting, and carving large limestone blocks. The precision of the reliefs suggests skilled artisans working within a coordinated program. This was not an improvised installation, but a planned component of urban design. Its integration with plazas, temples, and the ball court indicates careful spatial planning aimed at shaping collective experience. Visitors entering the ceremonial area would encounter the carved skulls as part of a choreographed ritual landscape. For modern observers, the skull platform can provoke discomfort. Rows of carved skulls challenge contemporary sensibilities. However, to dismiss the monument as mere brutality would obscure its historical value. It offers insight into how ancient societies articulated power, belief, and identity through architecture. It reveals the interplay between regional traditions and external influences. It demonstrates how ritual performance could be transformed into permanent stone narrative. Ultimately, the Toltec skull platform at Chichen Itza stands as a testament to a pivotal era in Mesoamerican history. It marks the emergence of a cosmopolitan center that synthesized Maya heritage with Central Mexican iconography. It embodies a worldview in which sacrifice, sustained cosmic balance, and political authority required ritual legitimacy. And it reminds us that monuments are not passive structures. They are active statements, shaping perception and reinforcing ideology. To study the Tzompantli is to confront the complexity of ancient civilizations. It challenges simplistic interpretations and invites deeper inquiry into how societies understand life, death, and power. In its silent rows of carved skulls, the monument preserves a dialogue between faith and authority, between regional identity and intercultural exchange. Through careful archaeological research and contextual analysis, it continues to provide enduring value, revealing not only what the ancient Maya and their neighbors built, but why they believed it mattered. In the heart of the Negev desert in Israel lie the remarkably preserved ruins of Shivta, an ancient town that challenges long-held assumptions about survival, adaptation, and economic ambition in one of the harshest environments of the ancient world. Unlike monumental capitals built beside rivers, Shivta stood in a landscape that receives minimal annual rainfall, has no permanent springs, and experiences extreme seasonal temperature shifts. Yet for several centuries, particularly during the Byzantine period, between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, it was a functioning agricultural settlement, a religious center, and a participant in regional trade networks. What makes Shivta extraordinary is not myth or legend. It is engineering, environmental adaptation, and historical transition preserved in stone. Shivta was originally established by the Nabateans, a people best known for their capital at Petra. The Nabateans were masters of desert trade and water management. They developed runoff farming systems that captured seasonal flash floods and diverted them into terraced fields. Rather than relying on rivers, they engineered the landscape itself to store and slow water. Shivta was one of several desert towns, along with sites such as Avdat and Mamshit, that formed part of a broader network across the Negev. During the Roman annexation of the Nabatean kingdom in the 2nd century CE, and especially under Byzantine rule centuries later, Shivta expanded significantly. What had once been a frontier settlement evolved into a structured town with residential quarters, storage facilities, streets, agricultural installations, and 3 large churches. The presence of 3 churches in what was not a massive urban center is one of the most striking features of the site. Their architectural scale indicates not only an established Christian community, but also a degree of prosperity. Archaeological surveys reveal that Shivta's houses were carefully constructed from local limestone. They were built around courtyards often, with upper stories, storage rooms, and access to cistern systems. The urban plan suggests deliberate organization rather than organic sprawl. Streets were narrow, designed to reduce sun exposure and channel occasional runoff. Beneath and around the settlement were large plastered cisterns capable of storing significant quantities of rainwater. Water was not drawn from a river, it was harvested from the sky. The water system remains the central key to understanding Shivta's success. The surrounding landscape was modified through terraces and catchment basins designed to capture winter rains. Even minimal precipitation, when properly directed, could sustain vineyards and small fields. Recent environmental studies suggest that while climate fluctuations may have occurred, there is no definitive evidence that the Negev during the Byzantine period was dramatically wetter than today. Instead, it appears that the inhabitants relied on highly efficient runoff agriculture, a technique that maximized every rainfall event. The most compelling economic indicator at Shivta is the presence of multiple wine presses. These installations include treading floors, collecting vats, and fermentation basins carved into stone and coated with waterproof plaster. Wine production here was not symbolic, it was systematic. During the Byzantine era, Gaza wine became a major export product throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Amphorae identified as Gaza jars have been found in shipwrecks and coastal sites far from the Negev. Shivta likely contributed to this trade network, producing wine destined for ports and then overseas markets. The idea that a desert town could produce surplus agricultural goods for export challenges modern perceptions of environmental limitation. Shivta demonstrates that aridity does not automatically equal sterility. With planning engineering and communal coordination, marginal land can become productive. Religiously, Shivta offers additional insight into cultural transformation. The town's three churches, commonly referred to as the North Central and South churches, reflect a mature Christian community. Architectural elements include apses, baptismal fonts, and decorative stonework. Faint fresco fragments have been identified in at least one church, suggesting painted interior programs. The prominence of ecclesiastical architecture indicates that by the Byzantine period, Shivta was fully integrated into the Christian world of the empire. Yet Shivta was never fortified in the manner of major military centers. Its stability seems to have depended less on walls and more on economic and administrative integration into broader imperial systems. The town thrived when regional trade routes were active and when centralized governance provided stability. By the 7th century, during the early Islamic period, following the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate, Shivta began a gradual decline. Notably, there is little archaeological evidence of violent destruction. Buildings were not systematically burned or demolished. Instead, occupation appears to have diminished progressively. Some structures show signs of limited, continued use into the early Islamic era, suggesting that abandonment was neither immediate nor catastrophic. Scholars debate the reasons for this decline. Several factors are considered plausible: shifts in trade routes, changes in demand for Gaza wine, economic contraction following imperial transformation, and administrative reorganization under new political authority. Climate variability may have played a role, but current data does not conclusively support a sudden environmental collapse. More likely, Shivta's existence depended on a delicate balance between agricultural productivity, trade connectivity, and political stability. When that balance shifted, the settlement's viability diminished. One of the most remarkable aspects of Shivta today is its state of preservation. Unlike many ancient cities that were continuously reoccupied and rebuilt over centuries, Shivta was largely left undisturbed after its abandonment. The desert environment paradoxically became a preservative force. Without significant later construction or looting on a massive scale, the urban layout remains legible. Streets, house walls, churches, wine presses, and cistern openings still define the settlement's skeleton. Because of this preservation, Shivta is part of the UNESCO-recognized incense route Desert Cities in the Negev, a designation that underscores its role within broader trade and cultural systems rather than isolating it as an anomaly. It represents a chapter in the history of desert urbanism, proof that settlement in arid lands was neither accidental nor unsophisticated. For modern audiences, Shivta offers more than historical curiosity. It provides a case study in sustainable adaptation. The inhabitants did not conquer the desert, they studied it. They observed rainfall patterns, terrain gradients, and soil behavior. They built infrastructure that required communal cooperation and long-term maintenance. Their system functioned for centuries. At the same time, Shivta reminds us that sustainability is context-dependent. Even highly efficient systems can falter when economic networks dissolve or political frameworks transform. Its silent streets are not evidence of technological failure, but of historical transition. There is no grand mystery hidden beneath Shivta's stones, no lost civilization beyond documented history. Its power lies in documented fact, a community that engineered survival in marginal land, integrated into global trade of its era, adopted and expressed new religious identity through monumental architecture and then gradually receded without spectacle. Standing among its limestone walls today, one sees not a ruin of impossibility, but a record of intelligence applied under constraint. Shivta demonstrates that ancient desert societies were not primitive outposts surviving at the edge of collapse. They were adaptive, networked, and technically capable. In an age increasingly concerned with water scarcity and climate stress, Shivta's lessons resonate with renewed relevance. Efficient water harvesting, decentralized storage, landscape modification, rather than extraction and integration of local production into broader trade systems, these were not modern innovations. They were practiced here more than a millennium ago. Shivta is not dramatic in scale like Petra, nor monumental like imperial capitals. Its significance is quieter. It proves that sustainability in extreme environments is achievable but fragile. It shows how trade, religion, technology, and ecology intersected in late antiquity. And it stands as one of the clearest archaeological testimonies to the ingenuity of desert communities in the ancient Near East. The Tullstorp runestone, recorded in the Danish runic corpus under the designation DR 271, stands in the village of Tullstorp in the region of Skåne, southern Sweden today. At the time it was carved in the late 10th century, this area was still within the sphere of authority of the Danish kingdom. From a historical perspective, the stone belongs to the final phase of the Viking Age, a period marked by political consolidation, the expansion of trans-European trade networks, and profound transformations in religious life across Scandinavia. The dating of the stone is established through runological analysis and stylistic evaluation. The form of the runic characters, the structure of the commemorative formula, and the carving techniques correspond closely with other stones erected in southern Scandinavia during the same period. This was an era in which elite families used runestones as a means of asserting status, lineage, and inheritance rights. These inscribed stones were commonly placed along roads near settlements or at prominent points in the landscape to ensure visibility and the broad communication of their message. In functional terms, runestones in Denmark and southern Sweden were not merely memorial markers. They served as instruments of collective memory, reinforced property claims, expressed political affiliations, and in many cases reflected the spread of Christianity. In its textual aspect, the Tullstorp runestone adheres to the familiar commemorative tradition. However, the imagery carved upon its surface distinguishes it from many contemporaneous stones. The inscription follows a conventional Viking Age memorial formula. It records that a man named Ulfi, or Ulf, raised the stone in memory of another individual, generally understood to be a relative, possibly a brother. The wording is concise, formal, and standardized, comparable to hundreds of other memorial inscriptions that have survived. There is no explicit reference to mythology, cosmology, or apocalyptic events within the written content. The separation between text and image is central to the scholarly importance of the monument. The inscription does not explain the large creature carved prominently on the reverse side. Consequently, interpretation of the figure relies on stylistic comparison and broader knowledge of Norse iconography rather than direct epigraphic evidence. The most striking visual feature of the Tullstorp runestone is a large animal carved in profile. Its body is elongated, its jaws opened wide to reveal teeth, and its posture conveys tension and force. The proportions and execution of this creature differ significantly from the serpentine beasts commonly found in late Viking Age artistic styles such as gelling or mammon. Here, the form is not characterized by intricate ribbon-like interlace, but by clear outlines and a strong, direct visual presence. Some scholars propose that the animal represents a wolf. Others go further, suggesting a connection to Fenrir, the monstrous wolf of Norse mythology, who plays a central role in the events of Ragnarok and is prophesied to kill Odin. This interpretation is based on visual parallels between the open-mouthed aggressive beast and literary descriptions of the mythic wolf preserved in later medieval Icelandic texts. However, this identification remains hypothetical. No line of the inscription refers to Fenrir or Ragnarok. The majority of the mythological accounts known today were written in the 13th century, more than 2 centuries after the stone was carved. For this reason, directly linking the carved image to later literary sources requires strict methodological caution. A more restrained interpretation suggests that the figure represents a stylized predator, symbolizing strength, ferocity, and elite warrior identity. In Norse culture, the wolf carried layered, symbolic meanings, appearing both as a destructive force in myth and as an emblem associated with battle and authority. Under this approach, the animal motif may function as a visual declaration of status and character connected to either the deceased or the commemorator. Adjacent to the creature is a vertical element often described as a pillar post or tree-like structure. Its shape has led to speculation that it may symbolize Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse cosmology. In mythological narratives, cosmic conflict frequently involves attacks upon sacred structures, encouraging interpretations that the beast is interacting with or assaulting a cosmic symbol. Yet, as with the identification of the wolf, no direct textual evidence on the stone confirms this reading. The vertical feature may simply be a compositional device, a boundary marker, or a stylized architectural form. From an archaeological standpoint, mythological interpretations must remain provisional in the absence of firm corroboration. Artistically, the Tullstorp runestone does not fit entirely within a single defined decorative school. The animal's body lacks the complex ribbon interlace characteristic of certain contemporary styles, instead presenting a bold, solid form with pronounced visual weight. This suggests the possibility of a local workshop or a regional variation within broader Scandinavian artistic traditions. Southern Scandinavia in the late Viking Age was a dynamic zone of cultural interaction. Trade routes connected the region to England, the Baltic, and the Frankish world, facilitating the movement of artistic motifs and technical knowledge. Local craftsmen may have adopted and reinterpreted external influences according to regional aesthetic preferences. The imagery on the Tullstorp stone can therefore be understood as a creative adaptation within a context of broad cultural exchange. The late 10th century also marked a period of significant religious transformation. Rulers such as Harold Bluetooth publicly promoted Christianity, and many contemporary stones incorporated crosses or Christian prayers. Against this backdrop, the absence of overt Christian symbols on the Tullstorp runestone is noteworthy. Its text does not invoke Christ or God, and no cross appears on its surface. This absence does not conclusively establish a purely pagan identity, but it reflects the uneven and complex nature of conversion processes. Families may have embraced new beliefs gradually while continuing established artistic conventions. Like many other runestones, the Tullstorp monument was likely erected in a conspicuous location to maximize visibility. Runestones functioned as public statements, simultaneously acts of remembrance and assertions of social legitimacy. The addition of a large animal motif significantly enhanced the monument's visual impact. In a society where literacy was limited, powerful imagery could communicate meaning more immediately than text alone. Modern study of the Tullstorp runestone relies on interdisciplinary methodology, combining runology, art history, comparative mythology, and landscape archaeology. no contemporary written explanation survives to clarify the precise meaning of the imagery, and scholars must therefore operate within frameworks of probability and contextual analysis. The importance of the Tullstorp runestone lies not in providing definitive proof of a Ragnarok scene, but in demonstrating the richness and ambiguity of late Viking Age visual culture. It illustrates how a commemorative monument could unite standardized text with evocative imagery without explicit explanation. The interpretive space between inscription and image remains the area in which modern scholarship continues to engage. Taken as a whole, the stone offers concrete archaeological data concerning memorial practices of the late 10th century, while simultaneously raising open questions about symbolism, identity, and religious transition. The combination of solid archaeological grounding and layered interpretive complexity secures the enduring significance of the Tullstorp runestone within the broader study of Viking Age Scandinavia. Within the ceremonial core of Venta, one of the principal centers of the Olmec civilization, archaeologists uncovered a series of deliberately buried greenstone mosaics that fundamentally changed scholarly understanding of early Mesoamerican ritual practice. These deposits, discovered primarily in Complex A during excavations led by Matthew Stirling and later systematically documented by Philip Drucker and colleagues in the mid-20th century, date to approximately 900 to 400 BCE. They are now known collectively as the Venta greenstone mask offerings. These were not portable masks intended to be worn. They were architectural mosaics constructed from carefully shaped blocks of serpentine and other greenstone materials arranged horizontally in prepared pits and permanently sealed beneath layers of clay and fill. Their significance lies not only in their craftsmanship, but in their intentional invisibility. Venta, located in present-day Tabasco, Mexico, was built on a natural ridge rising above surrounding wetlands. Complex A formed part of a carefully planned ceremonial precinct aligned along a north-south axis. Excavations revealed multiple offering caches beneath plazas and earthen platforms. The greenstone mosaics were placed within rectangular pits, dug into sterile clay, often lined or capped with contrasting layers of colored clay, sometimes red, sometimes yellow, before being sealed. The offerings were not isolated finds. They formed part of a patterned ritual landscape that included colossal basalt heads, massive earthen mounds, stone altars, tombs, and smaller dedicatory deposits. Their placement suggests they were foundational deposits, ritual acts, embedded within the construction sequence of ceremonial architecture. The mosaics consist of dozens to hundreds of precisely shaped greenstone blocks. In several examples, the stones were arranged to form a stylized face when viewed from directly above. The feature's almond-shaped eyes, cleft head motifs, and downturned mouths correspond to established Olmec iconographic conventions seen in sculpture and portable objects. The material itself is significant. Greenstone, including serpentine and occasionally jadeite, was symbolically charged throughout Mesoamerica. Its green color evoked vegetation, fertility maze, and life force. Geological sourcing indicates that these stones were not locally available in the immediate Venta region. Many likely originated from highland areas in what is now southern Mexico or Guatemala. Their presence demonstrates long-distance exchange networks already functioning in the early formative period. Each stone was shaped through grinding and polishing using abrasive techniques, while the technology was entirely within the capabilities of the timestone tools, sand abrasion, and labor-intensive finishing. The precision and uniformity of the blocks indicate careful planning and centralized organization of labor. Perhaps the most striking feature of the Venta mosaics is that they were never meant to remain visible. Once assembled, they were covered with layers of fill and incorporated into the substructure of plazas or platforms. No architectural provision was made to reopen or view them. Their meaning was activated at the moment of deposition, not through prolonged display. This pattern is consistent with dedicatory or cosmological offerings rather than commemorative monuments. In Mesoamerican cosmology, construction was often accompanied by ritual deposits symbolizing the animation of space. The act of burial could mark the establishment of sacred order, the consecration of a building phase, or the stabilization of cosmic forces. Some scholars interpret the face-shaped mosaics as representations of supernatural beings, possibly earth deities, or mythic ancestors, placed beneath the ceremonial center as a symbolic foundation. Others suggest they embody the Olmec word jaguar, or rain-associated entities known from sculptural programs. The absence of writing from this period prevents definitive identification. One of the most informative associated discoveries at Venta is known as Offering 4, a cache of 16 small figurines, carved from jade and serpentine, arranged in a deliberate tableau facing a row of upright celts. Though separate from the mosaic masks, Offering 4 demonstrates a shared logic of ritual staging and burial. Both cases reflect intentional arrangement, symbolic orientation, and immediate interment. The repeated use of greenstone celts in vertical and horizontal configurations across Complex A reinforces the idea that these materials carried cosmological meaning. Celt axes, frequently polished and deposited in groups, may have symbolized maize sprouts, lightning, or directional markers. The mosaic masks, therefore, should not be viewed in isolation, but as part of a coherent ritual grammar expressed through material placement, geometry, and color contrast. Venta was not an organic settlement, but a planned ceremonial center with axial symmetry. The north-south alignment of its principal mound and plaza corresponds to broader patterns observed in later Mesoamerican urbanism. Some researchers propose that these alignments reference celestial observations or cardinal directions central to cosmological ordering. Within this structured environment, the greenstone mosaics functioned as hidden nodes within a larger symbolic grid. Their geometry, rectangular pits, symmetrical facial layouts mirrors the formalism evident in above-ground sculpture and mound construction. This consistency suggests elite oversight and ideological coherence rather than isolated artistic expression. The creation of the greenstone offerings required coordinated labor procurement of distant raw materials, skilled stone-shaping excavation of pits, preparation of colored clay layers, precise arrangement, and ceremonial sealing. Such complexity indicates a society capable of organizing specialized craft production and directing collective effort toward non-utilitarian ends. Importantly, these were not grave goods associated with identifiable individuals. They represent communal or state-level ritual activity. Their placement beneath public ceremonial spaces implies participation, direct or indirect, by the broader community under elite guidance. This evidence supports interpretations of the Olmec as a stratified society with centralized authority during the Middle Formative period. The offerings demonstrate ideological investment in sacred architecture rather than purely domestic or subsistence priorities. Many portions of Complex A suffered damage from later oil development in the 20th century. Fortunately, detailed excavation records and artifact recovery preserved critical data about the mosaics before large-scale destruction occurred. Today, reconstructed diagrams and museum collections allow continued study of their configuration and materials. The absence of organic remains within the mosaic pits further emphasizes their symbolic rather than funerary purpose. They were not tomb markers, but cosmological statements embedded in earth and clay. Because the Olmec left no deciphered writing system from this period, interpretations rely on comparative iconography and spatial analysis. Later, Mesoamerican traditions, from the Maya to Central Mexican civilizations, emphasized dedicatory caches, directional symbolism, and greenstone's association with vitality and rulership. While direct continuity cannot be assumed, thematic parallels strengthen cosmological interpretations. The La Venta greenstone mask offerings remain archaeologically grounded phenomena, constructed mosaics of imported stone placed in prepared pits, sealed permanently, and integrated into ceremonial architecture between roughly 900 and 400 BCE. Their significance lies not in speculative narratives, but in what they demonstrate about early complex society in Mesoamerica. They reveal that by the Middle Formative Period, ritual architecture incorporated invisible, symbolically charged deposits requiring logistical planning, long-distance exchange, skilled craftsmanship, and ideological consensus. The offerings testify to a worldview in which sacred power was embedded beneath constructed space, animating it from below. The La Venta greenstone mask offerings are not mysterious because they defy technology or exceed known capabilities. Their tools and techniques are consistent with archaeological evidence. Their importance lies instead in their intentional burial, their geometric planning, and their integration into a broader ceremonial system. They represent one of the earliest large-scale examples in the Americas of ritualized architectural dedication using exotic materials arranged in formal iconographic patterns. Through these buried mosaics, the Olmec materialized cosmology in stone and clay, transforming constructed ground into sacred landscape. The enduring value of these findings is methodological as much as cultural. They illustrate how careful excavation, contextual analysis, and material sourcing can reconstruct aspects of belief and social organization, even in the absence of written texts. In that sense, the greenstone masks of La Venta are not simply artifacts, they are structural evidence of early state formation and ritual ideology in ancient Mesoamerica. The Kerma Eastern deufa stands at the center of one of the earliest complex states in sub-Saharan Africa. Located within the ancient city of Kerma in present-day northern Sudan, the structure dates primarily to the classic Kerma period, circa 1750 to 1500 BCE, though the site itself was occupied much earlier, beginning around 2500 BCE. Archaeological research over the last century has demonstrated that Kerma was not a peripheral outpost of Egypt, but the capital of an independent Nubian kingdom that rivaled Egyptian power during the Middle Kingdom and Second Intermediate period. The Eastern deufa is one of two major mud-brick religious structures at Kerma. The term deufa is derived from a Nubian word used locally to describe large mud-brick ruins. Unlike Egyptian temples constructed primarily of stone, the Eastern deufa was built from millions of sun-dried mud bricks, forming a massive multi-tiered structure that originally rose approximately 18 to 20 meters high. Its thick exterior walls and rectilinear mass give it a fortress-like appearance, yet excavation has revealed that it functioned as a religious complex rather than a defensive installation. Archaeological investigation, first systematically undertaken by George Andrew Reisner in the early 20th century and later by Swiss archaeologists such as Charles Bonnet, clarified the building's internal organization. The structure consists of a series of corridors, chambers, and stairways arranged in a carefully planned sequence. The upper levels were accessible via internal staircases, suggesting processional movement within the monument. The walls were originally plastered, and in some areas decorated with painted motifs. Fragments of wall paintings discovered inside include geometric designs and possibly symbolic representations, although preservation is limited. One of the most significant aspects of the Eastern deufa is its role within the urban plan of Kerma. The city was divided into distinct sectors, residential zones, administrative areas, industrial spaces, and extensive cemeteries to the east. The Eastern deufa occupied a central position in the sacred district, indicating that it functioned as a ceremonial hub. Its placement reflects deliberate spatial organization rather than organic settlement growth. This planned layout demonstrates a level of political coordination consistent with a centralized state. The broader Kerma kingdom controlled trade routes linking Central Africa with Egypt and the Near East. Archaeological finds at Kerma include imported Egyptian objects, luxury goods, and evidence of long-distance exchange networks. However, the Eastern deufa's architectural style is distinctly Nubian. While Egypt favored axial stone temples with open courts and columned halls, the deufa presents a solid vertically emphasized mass with interior chambers embedded within thick mud brick walls. The building technique required sophisticated knowledge of load distribution, moisture management, and long-term maintenance in a Nile floodplain environment. Its proximity to the vast royal cemetery at Kerma is critical for understanding its function. The cemetery contains large tumulus burials, some exceeding 70 meters in diameter. Elite graves from the classic Kerma period have yielded rich grave goods and, in certain cases, human remains interpreted as sacrificial retainers. Some royal tombs contain dozens, occasionally hundreds of subsidiary burials arranged around the central grave. Osteological studies confirm that these were individuals buried simultaneously with the ruler, suggesting ritual retainer sacrifice rather than later interment. The Eastern deufa likely played a role in the ceremonial processes associated with kingship and mortuary ritual. Although no written Nubian texts survive from this period to describe the rites performed there, the architectural prominence of the structure and its relationship to the royal cemetery strongly indicate state-level religious functions. It may have served as a temple dedicated to a local deity, a cult center legitimizing royal authority, or a location for rituals preceding burial in the tumuli. Unlike Egypt, where monumental inscriptions clarify the names of rulers and gods, Kerma left minimal written records. This absence of textual documentation increases reliance on material culture and spatial analysis. Ceramic typology, burial patterns, and architectural phases provide the primary chronological framework. Radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic studies confirm multiple building phases of the Eastern deufa, indicating that it was renovated and expanded over centuries. Such long-term use implies institutional continuity rather than temporary ceremonial activity. Another notable feature is the scale of labor mobilization required to construct the monument. Producing millions of mud bricks necessitated organized workforce management, access to raw materials, and sustained political authority. Mud brick, while less durable than stone, can achieve remarkable longevity in arid climates when maintained properly. The survival of the deufa for nearly 4 millennia attests to both environmental conditions and construction expertise. Kerma's geopolitical context further enhances the significance of the Eastern deufa. During Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Nubia was both a trade partner and a military adversary. Archaeological evidence indicates periods of conflict and Egyptian fortification construction along the Nile frontier. By the Second Intermediate Period, Kerma expanded its influence northward, even occupying parts of Upper Egypt. This political ascendancy suggests that the Eastern deufa functioned during a time when Kerma was a regional power capable of challenging Egypt directly. Excavations have uncovered evidence of ritual deposits within and around the structure, including ceramics, animal bones, and offering materials. These findings support its interpretation as a ceremonial shrine rather than a palace or warehouse. The architectural complexity, narrow corridors, elevated platforms, restricted access points, implies controlled movement consistent with ritual practice. The building's vertical prominence would also have made it a visible symbol of authority within the urban landscape. Importantly, modern archaeology has redefined the historical perception of Kerma. Earlier scholarship often interpreted Nubian civilization as derivative of Egyptian influence. However, stratigraphic evidence demonstrates that Kerma's urban development, ceramic styles, and religious architecture evolved locally. The eastern deufa embodies this indigenous development. Its design does not replicate Egyptian temple blueprints, and its symbolic framework appears rooted in Nubian cultural traditions. Today, the monument stands as one of the earliest large-scale religious buildings in Africa outside Egypt. Its preservation provides insight into construction techniques in mud-brick monumental architecture. It also challenges long-standing narratives that placed complex state formation exclusively within the Mediterranean or Near Eastern spheres. Kerma demonstrates that centralized governance, organized religion, and monumental construction were present in the Middle Nile Valley independently. From an archaeological standpoint, the eastern deufa is significant for four principal reasons. First, it confirms the existence of an organized Nubian state with the capacity for large-scale construction. Second, its architectural plan reveals a unique religious tradition, distinct from Egyptian models. Third, its association with royal tumulus burials links temple ritual directly with political authority and mortuary ideology. Fourth, its survival provides a rare case study in long-term mud-brick monument preservation. Although many questions remain regarding the specific theological beliefs of Kerma's inhabitants, ongoing excavations and scientific analyses continue to refine understanding of the site. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, ceramic residue analysis, and bioarchaeological studies of cemetery populations contribute to a more detailed reconstruction of Kerma's social hierarchy and ritual life. In conclusion, the Kerma Eastern Deufa Shrine is not merely an isolated mud-brick ruin. It represents the ceremonial nucleus of a powerful Nubian kingdom that flourished more than 3.5 millennia ago. Through archaeological evidence, rather than legend, it reveals a complex society capable of architectural innovation, political organization, and religious institution building on a monumental scale. The bath complex of Hisham's palace, also known as Khirbat al-Mafjar, stands among the most technically sophisticated and artistically ambitious constructions of the early Islamic period. Built in the first half of the 8th century of the Common Era, during the Umayyad Caliphate, the complex lies just north of Jericho, in the Jordan Valley. Archaeological evidence places its construction most likely under Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, who ruled from 724 to 743 of the Common Era, or under his successor Al-Walid II, who ruled from 743 to 744. Although the palace was never fully completed and was probably damaged by the major earthquake of 749, the remains of its bath complex provide rare and concrete insight into architectural continuity, technological transfer, and elite culture during a formative phase of Islamic civilization. The Umayyad dynasty governed an empire that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula across North Africa and the Levant to Central Asia. In the 8th century, a number of elite residences, commonly referred to as desert castles, were constructed throughout Bilad al-Sham or Greater Syria. Hisham's palace belongs to this group, yet it surpasses many of them in refinement and scale. These complexes were not defensive fortresses in the strict sense. Rather, they functioned as seasonal residences, agricultural estates, administrative centers, and ceremonial reception spaces. The location near Jericho was deliberate. The region offered fertile land access to water sources, proximity to trade routes, and a mild winter climate suitable for a royal retreat. Excavations, carried out primarily in the 1930s by the Department of Antiquities of Mandatory Palestine, revealed that the broader complex included a residential palace, a mosque courtyards, and an extensive bath structure. Among these components, the bathhouse is architecturally distinct and represents the most complete and technologically advanced part of the site. Its preservation allows scholars to reconstruct not only its form, but also its operational logic. The layout of the bath complex follows the classical Roman and Byzantine bathing sequence, demonstrating direct continuity with late antique architectural traditions. The structure incorporates a large entrance hall, a cold room known as the frigidarium, a warm room called the tepidarium, a hot room, or caldarium, a furnace area referred to as the pryfernium, and several auxiliary service spaces. This arrangement mirrors the design principles of Roman thermae developed centuries earlier. The presence of this configuration in an 8th century Islamic palace is not incidental. It reflects the integration of pre-Islamic engineering knowledge into Umayyad state architecture. Rather than discarding earlier systems, Umayyad builders adopted and refined them within a new political framework. The main hall of the bath complex is rectangular and was once covered by a dome supported by substantial piers. Its size and formal arrangement indicate that the bath was not intended for private domestic use by a small household. Instead, it functioned as a semi-public ceremonial environment associated with courtly gatherings. Bathing in this context was not merely hygienic, it was social and political, embedded within the culture of elite interaction. One of the most technically significant features of the complex is its hypocauste heating system. Inherited from Roman engineering traditions, the hypocauste consisted of a raised floor supported by numerous small brick or stone pillars known as pili. Beneath this elevated floor, hot air generated by a furnace circulated through open cavities, heating both the floors and the walls. Archaeological remains confirm carefully spaced pili supporting stone slabs, flue channels integrated vertically within the walls, and a dedicated furnace chamber positioned to optimize heat distribution. Such a system required precise planning, including airflow management, temperature regulation, and structural load calculations. The survival of this engineering expertise into the early Islamic period indicates that skilled craftsmen, likely trained within Byzantine traditions, were employed under Umayyad patronage. The bath's hypocauste does not simply demonstrate technological borrowing, it reflects the continued operation of skilled labor networks following the Islamic conquests of the 7th century. The most celebrated feature of the bath complex is its extensive mosaic flooring. The palace preserves one of the largest surviving mosaic pavements from the early Islamic world, covering approximately 825 square meters. The most famous section, commonly referred to as the Tree of Life mosaic, is located in the audience hall adjoining the bath complex. The composition presents a central stylized tree, 2 gazelles peacefully grazing on one side, and a lion attacking a gazelle on the opposite side. Scholars generally interpret this scene as symbolic rather than narrative. Some view it as political allegory, in which the lion represents the ruling caliph and embodies authority and domination. Others interpret it as cosmological symbolism, expressing the duality of peace and violence within creation. Another line of interpretation connects the imagery to courtly hunting iconography common in late antique and Sasanian art. Importantly, figural imagery in early Islamic art was not universally prohibited. Secular and palace contexts frequently included representations of animals and human figures. The mosaic program at Hisham's palace confirms that artistic conventions during the Umayyad period were more diverse than later Islamic traditions sometimes imply. The tesserae, composed of small and precisely cut stone pieces, demonstrate organized workshops operating with standardized production techniques. The geometric precision, careful shading, and compositional balance reveal advanced mosaic craftsmanship rooted in Byzantine artistic traditions. Construction materials throughout the complex include limestone blocks, plaster-carved stucco, and mosaic tesserae. Stucco fragments discovered on-site depict high-relief human figures, vegetal scrolls, and intricate decorative motifs. These sculptural elements display stylistic connections to both Sasanian Persian and Byzantine Mediterranean traditions, reflecting the cultural synthesis characteristic of the Umayyad court. Archaeological analysis indicates that many decorative components were prefabricated before installation, suggesting centralized planning and coordinated production. The bath's water supply likely depended on aqueduct channels and storage systems drawing from nearby springs. In a semi-arid environment, hydraulic engineering was essential to sustain regular bathing operations. The integration of water management heating systems and decorative architecture demonstrates comprehensive planning at an imperial scale. Evidence indicates that the complex suffered significant structural damage during the earthquake of 749, a well-documented seismic event that affected large parts of the Levant. Collapsed masonry, unfinished architectural details, and incomplete decorative programs suggest that construction may not have been entirely finalized at the time of destruction. After the Abbasid Revolution in 750, political authority shifted eastward toward Iraq. The Jericho Palace complex was never fully restored. Its relatively brief period of occupation contributes to the exceptional preservation of certain features, particularly mosaic floors that were sealed beneath debris. The bath complex of Hisham's palace is therefore significant on multiple levels. It demonstrates technological continuity between Roman, Byzantine, and early Islamic engineering traditions. It reveals the sophistication and cosmopolitan character of Umayyad elite culture. It preserves one of the largest early Islamic mosaic programs known today. It challenges simplified assumptions regarding aniconism in early Islamic art. It also provides direct archaeological evidence for courtly life in the 8th century of the Common Era. Rather than representing an isolated architectural experiment, the bath complex illustrates how the Umayyad state absorbed, reorganized, and redeployed regional expertise. The structure embodies administrative capacity, economic resources, and access to specialized craftsmen. From an archaeological perspective, the site serves as a case study in cultural transition. The bath complex does not mark a rupture with late antiquity. Instead, it represents the transformation of late antique traditions within a new Islamic political order. Archaeological evidence support the conclusion that the complex was not merely ornamental, but fully functional, technically integrated and symbolically charged. Its heating systems, hydraulic infrastructure, architectural planning, and mosaic decoration together form a coherent and deliberate design. Today, the remains of Hisham's palace stand as one of the most important early Islamic archaeological sites in the Levant, offering measurable data on construction techniques, artistic production, and imperial patronage during the 8th century of the Common Era. The wooden structure discovered at Colambo Falls, located on the border between Zambia and Tanzania, is one of the most far-reaching archaeological discoveries for re-evaluating the technological capacities of prehistoric humans. Dated to approximately 476,000 years ago, using optically stimulated luminescence methods, this structure appeared long before the emergence of Homo sapiens and is currently regarded as the earliest recorded evidence of intentional structural timber joining. Colambo Falls has long been recognized by researchers as a remarkable Pleistocene site due to its rare preservation conditions. It is one of the highest uninterrupted waterfalls in Africa, and the surrounding sedimentary area has remained waterlogged through multiple climatic cycles. The anaerobic oxygen-poor environment significantly slowed biological decomposition, allowing organic materials such as wood to survive for hundreds of thousands of years, something nearly impossible in most other archaeological contexts. During recent excavation campaigns conducted by a research team affiliated with the University of Liverpool, 2 large wooden logs were uncovered. What particularly captured scientific attention was not merely the presence of ancient wood, but clear evidence that the logs had been deliberately shaped and joined together in a calculated manner. Microscopic analysis confirmed the presence of cut marks produced by stone tools consistent with the Herculean technological tradition previously documented at the same site. One of the logs had been carved with a precisely shaped notch, so that the other log could be placed on top and stabilized securely. This was not random damage caused by natural forces, but the result of intentional modification. The form of the notch indicates an understanding of load distribution and structural stability. Creating such a joint required prior visualization of the completed configuration, as well as the ability to manipulate material with considerable precision. The logs themselves were substantial in size, suggesting that their selection, transport, and modification were not isolated or unorganized acts. The shaping process required repeated controlled cutting actions to remove material according to a clear plan. The craftsmanship reflects dexterity and developed spatial reasoning, exceeding traditional assumptions about the capabilities of Middle Pleistocene populations. Unlike previously known wooden artifacts, such as hunting spears, this construction was not a mobile tool, but a structural element integrated into the landscape. A tool serves immediate action. A structure reflects deliberate intervention in the environment. The presence of an interlocking timber joint at Colambo Falls indicates that humans of this period were not merely using nature, but actively reshaping it according to their needs. The age of approximately 476,000 years places the structure within the Middle Pleistocene, when Africa was inhabited by archaic human groups, possibly Homo heidelbergensis, or a closely related evolutionary branch. Although the specific species responsible cannot yet be determined, the dating clearly excludes Homo sapiens. Previously, the earliest widely accepted evidence of advanced woodworking was generally assigned to around 300,000 years ago. The discovery at Colambo Falls has pushed that boundary back by nearly 200,000 years, substantially expanding the timeline of architectural thinking. To create a precisely fitted joint, the maker had to understand the properties of wood, anticipate force interactions, and organize actions in a logical sequence. This implies long-term planning ability, spatial visualization, and structured task organization. If multiple individuals were involved, the construction also reflects cooperation and division of labor. These elements suggest that Middle Pleistocene populations possessed cognitive foundations far more complex than earlier simplified portrayals suggested. The exact function of the structure cannot yet be determined with certainty, but prevailing interpretations propose that it may have formed part of an elevated platform, a walkway across damp terrain, or a foundational support for a type of shelter. Regardless of its specific purpose, the act of construction itself demonstrates flexible environmental adaptation and the willingness to invest effort in a particular location, rather than maintaining purely continuous mobility. The discovery of a structurally joined wooden element also compels reconsideration of prehistoric settlement models. Traditional views portray populations of this era as highly mobile groups relying primarily on temporary shelters. However, the presence of deliberately modified large timbers suggests a higher degree of attachment to living space. Even if the structure existed for a limited period, the technological behavior involved extended far beyond simple opportunistic improvisation. It is important to emphasize that wood is almost never preserved in the archaeological record. The absence of comparable structures elsewhere may reflect natural decomposition rather than the absence of construction behavior. Colambo Falls therefore serves as a rare window into an organic architectural world largely lost to time. The stone tools discovered at the site belong to the Acheulean tradition, characterized by standardized bifacial hand axes and large cutting implements. The cut marks on the logs were most likely produced using these same tools, expanding the recognized functional range of Acheulean technology. Rather than serving exclusively for hunting or food processing, these implements may also have been used for structural carpentry. This discovery compels researchers to adjust several foundational assumptions. Complex construction behavior clearly emerged hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans. Intentional structural timber joining was not a late innovation, but has far deeper origins. Middle Pleistocene populations were not merely adapting to their environment, but actively transforming it. It is highly possible that organic architectural traditions existed long before stone architecture left durable traces in the archaeological record. Nevertheless, many questions remain unresolved. The full scale of the structure, whether it represents an isolated element or part of a larger construction, and the prevalence of similar building practices during the same period are still unclear. The specific archaic human species responsible also remains under investigation. Despite these uncertainties, the wooden structure at Colambo Falls currently stands as the oldest known evidence of intentional structural timber joining in the archaeological record. Nearly 500,000 years old, it demonstrates that archaic human populations possessed the cognitive, technical, and organizational capacities necessary for genuine construction solutions. In a discipline where preservation bias often distorts interpretations of the past, this discovery significantly broadens understanding of when architectural thinking first emerged in human evolutionary history. The Yuan Muhugiag child mummy is regarded as one of the most significant prehistoric discoveries ever recorded in the Central Sahara. The body was found in a rock shelter in the Yuan Muhugiag area, located within the Tadrat Akakus mountain range in southwestern Libya, a region renowned for its extensive rock art system and archaeological evidence of early pastoral communities. Radiocarbon dating results indicate that the burial dates to approximately 5,500 to 5,600 years before present, corresponding to around 3,700 BCE. This timeline makes it considerably older than the clearly documented artificial mummification practices of dynastic Egypt. The exceptional value of this discovery lies not only in its early date, but also in the archaeological evidence demonstrating that the body was deliberately treated and preserved. The child, estimated to have been about 2 to 3 years old at the time of death, was not naturally desiccated by chance under harsh climatic conditions. Scientific analyses reveal systematic intervention. The abdominal cavity bears traces indicating that the internal organs were removed. The body was treated with plant-based materials, likely functioning as natural desiccants or preservatives. It was then carefully wrapped in animal skin, most likely antelope hide, and placed in a characteristic flexed position. The entire bundle was tightly secured and interred within the rock shelter. This sequence of actions reflects a clearly structured funerary procedure rather than a simple burial. The removal of internal organs, the use of botanical materials, and the organized wrapping indicate empirical knowledge of bodily decomposition. Although this method does not entirely correspond to the complex embalming techniques of later Egypt, it nevertheless represents a clear case of artificial mummification within a prehistoric African context. Its early date compels scholars to reconsider the long-held assumption that advanced mortuary technology originated exclusively in the Nile Valley. To properly evaluate the significance of the burial, it must be placed within the environmental context of the mid-Holocene period. At that time, the Sahara was not the arid desert it is today. The region belonged to what scientists refer to as the African humid period, when lakes, seasonal rivers, savanna grasslands, and diverse wildlife were present across the landscape. Archaeological surveys in the Tadrat Akakas have revealed evidence of pastoral communities managing livestock, producing pottery, and creating refined rock art. These populations were not isolated survival groups, but possessed symbolic systems, ritual practices, and stable social structures. Within this context, the deliberate preservation of a child's body suggests the existence of beliefs concerning death and possibly concepts of continuity after death. Artificial mummification requires time, skill, and coordination, reflecting social investment in funerary rites. Whether this practice was widespread or reserved for exceptional cases cannot yet be determined, as no additional mummies of similar date have been discovered in the region to date. Because there are no written records, interpretation relies entirely on material analysis. Microscopic examination identified the presence of plant material within the wrappings. Osteological analysis confirmed the child's age and the intentional interventions performed on the body. Organic samples associated with the burial were radiocarbon dated, providing a reliable chronological framework. The convergence of these lines of evidence confirms that this was not a case of natural desiccation, but the result of a deliberate and technically informed preservation process. One of the most debated issues concerns cultural transmission. Did knowledge of body preservation in the Central Sahara influence later mortuary practices in the Nile Valley? Or did both regions independently develop similar technologies? At present, there is no direct evidence linking the Yuan Muhugiag burial with early Egyptian mummification traditions. Geographic and chronological distance leave multiple possibilities open. During the African humid period, the Sahara functioned more as a corridor of interaction than as a natural barrier, allowing movement of people and ideas. However, without intermediary evidence demonstrating continuity, any hypothesis of direct influence remains speculative. From a technical perspective, the removal of soft tissue to slow decomposition demonstrates practical biological understanding. Plant materials may have served both functional and symbolic roles. The leather wrapping created a sealed microenvironment that reduced external exposure. The flexed body position aligns with many other prehistoric African burials, yet the added preservation procedures distinguish this case from ordinary interment. The burial also provides important insight into social organization. The level of funerary investment reflects communal values assigned to the deceased. Conducting such a complex procedure for a child indicates that even young members held recognized positions within a ritual system. It also demonstrates that knowledge related to anatomy, materials, and ceremonial processes was transmitted within the community as part of a shared tradition. The broader archaeological record of the Tadrat Akakas supports this interpretation. Rock engravings depict cattle, wildlife, and human figures engaged in organized activities. Pottery fragments recovered from nearby sites exhibit consistent techniques and stylistic coherence. The combination of pastoralism, artistic production, and deliberate burial practices indicates a society with durable cultural structures. Climate change is a crucial element in this narrative. When the African humid period ended, increasing aridity gradually transformed the Sahara into desert. Communities were compelled to migrate toward regions with stable water sources, including the Nile Valley. Environmental transformation may have disrupted or dispersed the funerary traditions developed in the Central Sahara. Whether such knowledge traveled with migrating populations remains an unresolved question. Methodologically, the Yuan Muhugiag case underscores the importance of interdisciplinary research. Archaeology, radiocarbon dating, osteological analysis, residue chemistry, and paleo-environmental studies all contribute to reconstructing a comprehensive understanding. No single dataset alone could demonstrate artificial mummification. Only the convergence of multiple evidentiary lines permits a secure conclusion. This discovery also reshapes perspectives on prehistoric Africa. The notion that complex mortuary ritual emerged only alongside early state societies is incomplete. This burial predates pharaonic civilization by more than a millennium, demonstrating that refined symbolic behavior and technical bodily intervention existed within communities lacking monumental architecture or writing systems. From a strictly archaeological standpoint, the significance of the burial rests on 4 verifiable elements: early radiocarbon dating, deliberate removal of internal organs, the presence of plant materials used for preservation, and an organized wrapping structure within animal skin. Together, these elements confirm intentional preservation and demonstrate that knowledge of bodily intervention existed outside the Nile Valley at an early stage. Therefore, the Yuan Muhugiag child mummy is not merely an isolated case within the Saharan archaeological record, but a foundational dataset in the study of early mortuary technology, environmental transformation, and cultural complexity in prehistoric Africa. Its importance rests on clear, empirical evidence showing that sophisticated body treatment emerged in the Central Sahara during a period when the region sustained organized pastoral communities with developed ritual life. Deep inside the cave systems of northern Spain, within the complex that includes the cave of El Castillo and the nearby La Pasiega cave, archaeologists have documented a mark that appears simple yet carries extraordinary significance: a red, circular disc placed directly onto the limestone wall. At first glance, it is merely a round patch of red pigment without figuration and without intricate detail. However, rigorous scientific analyses have positioned this circle among the oldest, securely dated examples of cave art ever known, thereby opening far-reaching implications for understanding the emergence of symbolic thought in the evolutionary history of humankind. This red disc belongs to the broader Paleolithic artistic tradition of Cantabria, a region renowned for caves adorned over many millennia. Unlike the vivid and sophisticated animal paintings that appear in later European caves, this circle represents an earlier artistic layer in which dots, lines, hand stencils, and abstract signs predominate. What makes it remarkable lies not in decorative complexity, but in a chronology that extends far beyond what was once assumed about the origins of art. In the year 2018, an international research team applied uranium thorium dating to the calcite layer that had formed over the red pigment. This method is based on measuring the radioactive decay of uranium isotopes into thorium within mineral deposits. Because calcite forms only after the pigment has been applied, determining the age of this mineral layer provides a minimum date for when the artwork was created. The results showed that the calcite covering the red disc is at least 64,000 years old. This figure precedes the widely accepted arrival of Homo sapiens in Western Europe, which occurred approximately 45,000 years ago. If this minimum age is accurate, the creator of the circle could not have been modern humans, but must have been Neanderthals, the only human population inhabiting the region at that time. This conclusion fundamentally altered a long-standing debate about Neanderthal cognitive abilities. For many decades, symbolic expression and artistic creativity were regarded as distinctive traits of Homo sapiens. The establishment of such an early date for the red disk has compelled scholars to reconsider that assumption, as it demonstrates that symbolic behavior emerged earlier and may not have been exclusive to modern humans. The red disk does not exist as an isolated phenomenon. It forms part of a broader corpus of early cave markings across the Iberian Peninsula, including abstract shapes and hand stencils discovered at multiple sites. In La Pasiega, the disk appears alongside other red signs, indicating a repeated practice of marking specific areas within the cave interior. The caves of Cantabria were used intermittently for tens of thousands of years, as evidenced by habitation layers near their entrances. The fact that the red disk lies deeper within the cave rather than near the entrance suggests deliberate movement into the dark interior rather than accidental contact. Unlike the Upper Paleolithic art associated with Homo sapiens, where animals are depicted with striking detail, this earlier symbolic repertoire emphasizes geometric and non-figurative elements. This contrast may reflect cultural divergence between human groups or simply represent an earlier developmental stage in artistic expression. Microscopic analysis indicates that the pigment used was red ochre, a form of iron oxide widely available in Paleolithic environments. The circular shape appears to have been created by applying pigment onto the rock surface, possibly by blowing powdered ochre through a hollow bone or similar tube. The edges of the disc are relatively well defined, and the density of color is fairly uniform, indicating technical control rather than accidental staining. Preparing ochre requires collecting mineral material, grinding it into fine powder, and potentially mixing it with a binding agent, which implies knowledge of material properties and the intentional transformation of natural resources for specific purposes. If Neanderthals were indeed responsible for creating this red disk, its implications extend beyond the history of art. Placing a symbolic mark on a cave wall implies abstract thought, meaning the capacity to represent an idea, not physically present. It also suggests social communication, whether in ritual, territorial, or group identity contexts. Over the past 2 decades, increasing archaeological evidence has shown that Neanderthals used pigments, crafted personal ornaments, and organized living spaces with deliberate structure. The red disk adds to this growing body of data, reinforcing the view that their symbolic life was far richer than previously assumed. The dating results have not been accepted without scrutiny. Some researchers question whether the calcite layer measured truly formed immediately after the pigment was applied. It must be emphasized that uranium-thorium dating provides a minimum age rather than an exact creation date. Nevertheless, the analytical procedures presented in the study published in the year 2018 underwent peer review. Multiple samples were tested to minimize contamination risk, and consistent results across different caves strengthened the argument for symbolic activity predating the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. Even if future research refines the precise chronological framework, the red disk remains among the earliest known examples of cave art. Its significance lies not only in its antiquity, but also in its capacity to challenge linear models of cultural evolution that were once widely accepted. Compared to the approximately 40,000-year-old animal paintings often associated with Homo sapiens, the Cantabrian red disk is nearly 20,000 years older, thereby questioning the assumption that complex symbolic behavior emerged exclusively with modern humans. This discovery also aligns with evidence from Africa, indicating that symbolic markings appeared very early in the history of the genus Homo. Taken together, Archaeological data suggest that the capacity for symbolic cognition may have deeper roots than previously anticipated and may have been shared among multiple human lineages. The El Castillo red disk, in formal terms, is only a minimal circle, yet scientifically it stands as a pivotal marker in the study of cognitive evolution. Dated to at least 64,000 years, through uranium-thorium analysis of the overlying calcite, it predates the arrival of Homo sapiens in Western Europe, and therefore strongly suggests Neanderthal authorship. Archaeological context, pigment analysis, and comparative research all indicate that this was an intentional and clearly symbolic act. That small red circle preserved in the darkness of the cave for tens of millennia has become crucial evidence that abstract thought and cultural expression were not exclusive traits of modern humans. It compels a reconsideration of what it meant to be human in the deep reaches of prehistory. Nevali Cori is one of the most academically significant pre-pottery Neolithic sites ever excavated in southeastern Anatolia. Located near the middle course of the Euphrates River in present-day Turkey, this settlement was primarily studied during the 1980s under the direction of the German archaeologist Harald Hauptmann. Not long after the excavations were completed, the entire site was submerged beneath the reservoir formed by the Ataturk Dam, leaving the published archaeological records as the only remaining source of information. Its ancient chronology, complex architectural structures, and ritual traces make Nevali Cori a key to deciphering the earliest stages of settled life and organized religion in Southwest Asia. Nevali Cori belongs to the pre-pottery Neolithic B phase, dating to approximately 8,600 to 8,000 BCE. This was a pivotal transitional period in human history when communities across the Fertile Crescent gradually moved away from mobile hunter-gatherer lifeways toward long-term settlement and early food production. Therefore, the site lies within the same cultural horizon as Göbekli Tepe, yet Nevali Cori provides clearer evidence of the integration between domestic residence and ritual architecture. Stratigraphic analysis and radiocarbon dating indicate that the site underwent multiple successive building phases. This was not a short-lived temporary camp, but a structured community that maintained continuity across generations, demonstrating stable habitation before fully developed agricultural economies were established. Excavations uncovered rectangular houses built on stone foundations with upper walls made of mud brick. The shift from circular to rectangular architecture reflects a profound transformation in spatial thinking associated with concepts of permanent residence and communal order. These houses were arranged in planned clusters, indicating intentional organization rather than spontaneous growth. Within these structures, storage areas, hearths, and repeated rebuilding phases were identified, providing evidence of year-round occupation. Botanical remains indicate early cultivation of einkorn wheat and barley, while wild resources continued to be exploited alongside them. Faunal remains reflect a mixed subsistence strategy, including early management of sheep and goat herds, together with hunting activities. All of this evidence points to a transitional economy, not yet fully agricultural, but already far beyond a purely foraging model. The most prominent discovery at Nevali Cori was a large rectangular structure interpreted as ritual architecture. Inside this space, monolithic limestone pillars, shaped in the form of a T, were erected upright, set into stone sockets, and integrated into the walls, creating a clearly organized interior layout. The T-shaped form recalls Göbekli Tepe, yet here it existed within a functioning, settled village, demonstrating that ritual architecture was not separated from daily life. Some pillars were carved in relief with stylized arms and hands, reinforcing the hypothesis that the T-shape represents an abstraction of the human form. If this interpretation is correct, then as early as the 9th millennium BCE, humans were already integrating anthropomorphic symbolism into architectural structures, creating spaces that carried meaning beyond simple shelter. The sculptural tradition at Nevali Cori further clarifies the level of symbolic sophistication present. Archaeologists discovered numerous limestone statues, nearly life-sized, along with carefully carved heads. One statue larger than life with drilled eye sockets that may once have held inlaid materials demonstrates a high level of technical skill in working stone with stone tools. The standardized posture and stylized features of these works imply the existence of an established symbolic system widely shared within the community. Quarrying, transporting, shaping, and finishing such large stone blocks required skill time and significant collective coordination, reflecting a society structured well beyond the scale of individual households. One of the most impressive technical achievements at Nevali Cori was the production of terrazzo floors, crafted with remarkable precision. This process involved burning limestone at high temperatures to produce lime, mixing it with aggregates, laying it as a floor surface, and polishing it to a smooth and durable finish. Lime production requires temperatures of approximately 700 to 900 degrees Celsius, a remarkable accomplishment within a Neolithic technological context. These terrazzo floors were not only durable, but also clearly aesthetic, particularly when appearing in ritual spaces. This indicates that knowledge of pyrotechnology and the capacity for organized labor had already reached a considerable level at an early date, challenging older assumptions that prehistoric societies possessed only rudimentary construction skills. The large-scale constructions and sculptural activities at Nevali Cori demonstrate community-wide labor coordination. Erecting monolithic stone pillars could not have been accomplished by a single individual, but required planning, division of tasks, and cooperation. Although there is no evidence of centralized state authority, the existence of shared ritual architecture suggests emerging forms of social organization, possibly based on ritual leadership or collective consensus. Rather than viewing monumental constructions solely as a consequence of agricultural surplus, Nevali Cori suggests that symbolic and ritual motivations may have played a leading role in fostering social cohesion and stabilizing settlement. Although the number of burials at the site was not as abundant as at some contemporary settlements, the broader regional context of this period reveals the development of complex mortuary practices, including skull removal and plastering elsewhere. The sculptural emphasis on the human head at the Nevali Cori aligns with regional traditions that place symbolic importance on human identity and ancestral memory. This reflects the formation of concepts of identity, lineage, and connections between present generations and the past. Nevali Cori represents a link within the network of early Neolithic communities in Upper Mesopotamia and southeastern Anatolia. Architectural parallels with Göbekli Tepe indicate a shared symbolic vocabulary, while the integration of ritual and residential spaces highlights the site's distinctive character. Together with increasing cultivation, herd management, and long-distance obsidian exchange across the region, Nevali Cori reflects a historical phase in which social structure, technology, and symbolism evolved in parallel. The submergence of the site beneath the reservoir renders further excavation impossible, thereby increasing the value of the published archaeological records. These data compel scholars to reconsider long-accepted linear models of social evolution, in which agriculture is viewed as the prerequisite for social stratification and monumental ritual architecture. At Nevali Cori, large-scale ritual construction appears contemporaneous with, or possibly preceding, the full establishment of agricultural economies. This suggests that symbolic systems and ritual practices may have acted as catalysts for settlement processes rather than merely as their byproducts. Nevali Cori thus stands as compelling evidence that as early as the 9th millennium BCE, humans already possessed complex conceptual thought, remarkable technical skills, and the social organizational capacity necessary to create spaces imbued with meaning beyond basic survival needs. Although it now lies beneath the waters, the scientific legacy of Nevali Cori continues to shape our understanding of the origins of settled society, ritual architecture, and the emergence of symbolic worlds in human history. In the fertile Beth Shean Valley of the Jordan River Basin, the ancient mound of Tel Dan has yielded one of the most unexpected economic discoveries of the Iron Age, a large-scale organized apiary dating to the 10th–9th centuries BCE. Unlike scattered evidence of honey hunting or small household beekeeping known from other regions, the installation at Tel Dan represents the earliest archaeologically documented industrial beekeeping complex in the ancient Near East. Its preservation context and scientific analyses have significantly reshaped how scholars understand early Levantine economies. Excavations directed by Amihai Mazar in the late 20th and early 21st centuries exposed a dense urban settlement with substantial architecture storehouses, courtyards, and administrative buildings. Within one of these areas, archaeologists uncovered rows of cylindrical clay structures carefully arranged in parallel lines. These were not ovens, pipes, or architectural fragments, as first suspected. Closer study revealed that they were man-made beehives, elongated clay cylinders approximately 80 centimeters long and about 40 centimeters in diameter, constructed from a mixture of mud and straw. Each cylinder had a small circular opening at one end to allow bees to enter and exit, and a removable lid at the opposite end for harvesting honeycombs. More than 30 intact or partially preserved hives were found in situ, but the layout indicates that the original installation may have included between 100 and 200 hives stacked in tiers. If even a fraction were active simultaneously, annual honey production could have reached several hundred kilograms in addition to substantial quantities of beeswax. Such output surpasses household subsistence needs and strongly suggests surplus production, likely integrated into trade networks or institutional redistribution systems. The economic implications are substantial. In the Iron Age, Levant honey served as one of the primary sweeteners predating widespread sugar cultivation by millennia. It functioned not only as food, but also as an ingredient in fermented beverages, medicinal preparations, cosmetics, and ritual offerings. Beeswax was equally valuable used in lost wax, metal casting, sealing containers, waterproofing, and possibly in cultic practices. The presence of a centralized apiary within an urban setting indicates planned investment, labor organization, and technical expertise. Beekeeping at this scale requires knowledge of seasonal cycles, swarm management, hive construction, and safe harvesting techniques. It also implies risk management, as maintaining large concentrations of bees inside a city would demand careful placement and oversight. One of the most significant findings from Tel Dan concerns the biological identity of the bees themselves. Remains of bees preserved due to a destruction layer caused by fire were subjected to morphological analysis. The results indicated that the bees were not the local Levantine subspecies, but were closely related to Anatolian bees native to what is now Turkey. This suggests that Iron Age inhabitants imported specialized bee populations over considerable distances. Transporting live bee colonies across hundreds of kilometers would have required advanced logistical planning and an understanding of how to keep hives viable during transit. The choice to import bees implies selective breeding or quality considerations, possibly favoring higher honey yields or calmer temperaments better suited to dense urban environments. The apiary's location within the city walls further challenges assumptions about ancient production zones. Industrial or potentially hazardous activities are often expected at the periphery of settlements. At Tel Dan, however, The hives were positioned within a built environment that appears to have had administrative or elite associations. This spatial integration hints that honey production may have been overseen by centralized authorities, perhaps palace officials or temple institutions, rather than independent household producers. Such control would align with broader patterns of Iron Age political economies in which agricultural surplus was collected, stored, and redistributed through hierarchical systems. Chronologically, the apiary falls within a period of regional transformation. The 10th and 9th centuries BCE saw the emergence of territorial kingdoms in the Levant, expanding trade routes and intensified craft specialization. Tel Rehov itself shows evidence of robust urban planning and participation in interregional exchange. The apiary fits into this context as a high-value production unit capable of generating commodities suitable for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Honey and wax could travel more easily than bulky grain, offering economic flexibility and resilience. The installation met a violent end. A destruction layer, dating to the late 9th century BCE, possibly associated with military campaigns in the region, sealed many of the hives in place. Ironically, this catastrophe contributed to their preservation, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct their arrangement and recover organic remains rarely found in open-air sites. After this destruction event, there is no clear evidence that the large-scale apiary was rebuilt in the same configuration. Whether this reflects political upheaval, environmental change shifting trade patterns, or technological transition remains uncertain. The Tel Rehov apiary compels a reassessment of technological sophistication in the Iron Age Levant. It demonstrates systematic agricultural innovation, interregional biological exchange, and organized labor management more than 3 millennia ago. Far from being a marginal or experimental practice, beekeeping at Tel Rehov appears to have been an established, economically integrated enterprise. The discovery bridges textual traditions that speak of lands flowing with milk and honey and tangible archaeological data, revealing how honey was actually produced at scale. For modern audiences, the value of Tel Rehov lies not in romantic mystery, but in concrete insight. It illustrates how small organisms, bees, were embedded in large systems of economy and power. It reveals the interconnectedness of ancient societies across geographic boundaries. It underscores that innovation is not solely the hallmark of modern industry, but a recurring feature of human adaptation. Most importantly, it reminds us that complex supply chains, quality control, and resource specialization are not recent inventions. They are deeply rooted in the ancient past. Tel Rehov's apiary stands as material evidence of an organized agricultural economy operating with planning expertise and regional connectivity. Its clay cylinders, once alive with thousands of bees, preserve a moment when urban society invested in controlled biological production to generate surplus and value. In doing so, they transform our understanding of Iron Age life from subsistence simplicity to structured economic complexity, grounded in technical knowledge and institutional coordination. The Svingerud runestone, discovered in 2021 during excavations in Hull, Norway, quickly became one of the most important rune-related discoveries of the 21st century. Unlike the monumental Viking Age memorial stones commonly seen across Scandinavia, this artifact is only a relatively small sandstone slab found within the context of a cremation grave. Its significance does not lie in its size or decoration, but in its dating. Radiocarbon analysis of burned bone fragments and charcoal directly associated with the burial indicates a date range between the year 1 and the year 250 of the Common Era, with a high probability in the 2nd century. If the interpretation of the archaeological context is correct, the Svingerud runestone may be the earliest securely dated runic inscription ever known. The slab was uncovered during a systematic archaeological excavation conducted prior to infrastructure development. It lay within a cremation mound, and particularly important was the careful collection and analysis of organic materials from the same stratigraphic layer. Radiocarbon dating of the burned bones and charcoal provides a reliable chronological framework placing the artifact within the Roman Iron Age of Scandinavia. Unlike earlier discoveries that lacked clear stratigraphic context, the Svingerud runestone was documented under modern excavation standards with strict stratigraphic recording. Although the stone itself cannot be directly dated, the close association between the artifact and the organic samples from the same layer establishes a scientifically grounded chronological basis. This time frame is significantly earlier than most previously known runic inscriptions, which are typically dated to the 3rd or 4th centuries of the Common Era. This compels researchers to reconsider the starting point of the runic tradition in Northern Europe. Rather than emerging late and already relatively complete, runic writing may have formed and been used much earlier through a gradual evolutionary process. The inscription on the slab consists of several short rune sequences carved into the sandstone surface. One sequence has tentatively been read as Idiberug, although this reading has not achieved full scholarly consensus. There is no complete sentence structure or clear commemorative formula as seen on later Viking Age stones. The symbols appear fragmented, and the carving depth and line quality are uneven, suggesting that the technique was still in the process of refinement. For this reason, scholars have proposed multiple interpretations. The sequence may represent a personal name, it may function as a mark of ownership or dedication. It may reflect an early commemorative formula, or it could be evidence of practice carving at a stage when runic writing was still experimental. The character forms themselves are highly significant. Some shapes correspond to the Elder Futhark, the earliest standardized runic alphabet consisting of 24 characters. However, other signs appear unusual or difficult to classify, suggesting that this may belong to a phase before the script was fully standardized. If so, the Svingerud runestone may capture a transitional moment when Germanic communities were beginning to adapt and shape a distinct writing system influenced by Mediterranean alphabets such as Latin or North Italic. Most researchers agree that runic writing developed through contact between Germanic groups and the Roman world. Trade, military service in Roman armies, and diplomatic exchange created channels through which alphabetic knowledge could spread northward. If the Svingerud runestone indeed dates to the 2nd century of the Common Era, this indicates that the adoption and adaptation of writing occurred earlier and more systematically than previously assumed. It also suggests that Scandinavian communities of that period were not isolated from broader European intellectual currents, but participated in wider networks of cultural exchange. The funerary context of the slab carries particular importance. Placing writing within a cremation grave indicates that runes from an early stage were associated with personal identity, social status, or ritual practice. In later centuries, runes were used to commemorate the dead, assert lineage, and mark authority. The Svingerud runestone may represent one of the earliest precursors of that tradition. However, there is no concrete evidence that the inscription contains magical or mythological content. Any direct connection to later Norse traditions must be approached with caution, since this stone predates Viking Age literary sources by several centuries. The brevity and ambiguity of the inscription align with broader patterns seen in early Germanic epigraphy, where inscriptions often consist of a single word or personal name. In such contexts, writing did not aim to convey lengthy narratives, but served to identify, assert presence, or mark ownership. The uneven carving quality, further reflects a technique still under development, reinforcing the hypothesis that the script was in a formative stage. If recognized as one of the earliest runic inscriptions, the Svingarud runestone would reshape current understanding of the emergence of literacy in Scandinavia. Rather than appearing suddenly in the 3rd or 4th centuries, runic writing may have existed and developed gradually across multiple generations. This suggests that Roman influence penetrated further north than previously believed, while also emphasizing the active role of Germanic communities in transforming external writing technology into a system with its own distinct identity. Despite its significance, the discovery remains the subject of scholarly debate. The precise reading of the characters and the degree of certainty regarding contextual dating continue to be examined. Archaeology demands caution and reliance on empirical evidence. The Svingarud runestone does not prove that literacy was widespread in early 2nd century Scandinavia, nor does it demonstrate the existence of complex written communication. What it does provide is materially grounded evidence that knowledge of alphabetic carving was present and used within a funerary environment earlier than had previously been securely documented. From a scientific perspective, the importance of the Svingarud runestone lies not in sensationalism, but in verifiable archaeological data. It offers a crucial piece of evidence in determining when, how, and under what circumstances runic writing first appeared in Northern Europe, while also opening a renewed perspective on the developmental trajectory of the Germanic writing tradition. The so-called giant reservoir gates of Dholavira refer to the monumental stone-built inlets, spillways, and access passages integrated into one of the most sophisticated water management systems of the ancient world. Located on Kadir Island in the Rann of Kutch, Gujarat, India, Dholavira was a major urban center of the Indus Valley civilization, occupied roughly between 3000 and 1500 BCE. Archaeological excavations, especially those led by R.S. Bisht of the Archaeological Survey of India, have demonstrated that water control was not a peripheral feature of the city. It was central to its urban design, economy, and long-term survival in a semi-arid environment. Dholavira was established in a region characterized by extreme climatic variability. Today, the surrounding Rann is a seasonal salt marsh, and in antiquity, the area already faced fluctuating rainfall and limited perennial water sources. The city was positioned between 2 seasonal rivulets, the Mansar and the Manhar. These channels flowed primarily during monsoon periods, rather than relying on a major river as seen in other Indus cities like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. Dholavira's inhabitants engineered a localized hydraulic solution tailored to intermittent water availability. Archaeological surveys confirm that embankments, diversion channels, and bunds were constructed to intercept monsoon runoff. Water was then directed into a network of reservoirs built both inside and along the fortification walls of the city. This deliberate integration of hydrology and urban architecture is a defining feature of Dholavira's planning. Excavations have identified at least 16 reservoirs of varying sizes arranged around the citadel and middle town. Some reservoirs exceed 70 meters in length and are several meters deep. Many were cut directly into bedrock and then lined or reinforced with carefully dressed stone masonry. The cumulative storage capacity would have been substantial, likely sufficient to sustain the population through extended dry seasons. The reservoirs were not isolated basins. They were interconnected by stone-lined channels, sluices, and regulated inlets, what are often described as gates. These elements allowed the controlled entry distribution and possibly overflow management of water. Archaeological evidence indicates that water could be diverted from natural runoff into specific tanks depending on need, sediment load, or storage priorities. The engineering principle here is clear: maximize capture during short, intense rainfall events and minimize loss through evaporation or uncontrolled overflow. In a region where annual precipitation was unpredictable, such infrastructure would have been essential for urban continuity. The stonework associated with the reservoir inlets and channels demonstrates a high degree of planning and technical skill. Blocks were quarried, shaped, and laid with notable precision. While copper and bronze tools were available during the Indus period, the uniformity and finish of certain stone surfaces suggests standardized construction methods and skilled labor organization. Importantly, the masonry often relied on tight-fitting stone courses rather than thick mortar layers. This approach enhanced structural stability, particularly in retaining walls subjected to hydraulic pressure. In some areas, steps were incorporated into the reservoirs, allowing access to water as levels fluctuated seasonally. These stepped descents reflect both functional and possibly social considerations, as water access may have been regulated or stratified within the urban hierarchy. Archaeologists have documented sluice-like features that could regulate flow between reservoirs or between the city's internal tanks and external catchment areas. Although no mechanical gate mechanisms have survived, the architecture itself indicates deliberate flow control rather than passive storage. Dholavira's city plan was tripartite: a citadel, or castle, a middle town, and a lower town, each demarcated by massive fortification walls. The reservoirs were embedded within this defensive architecture. In several cases, the inner faces of fortification walls doubled as retaining walls for adjacent tanks. This dual-use strategy optimized material investment and spatial organization. Such integration implies centralized planning. The reservoirs were not retrofitted additions. They were foundational to the city's design. This contrasts with some other Indus settlements where drainage systems are prominent but large-scale reservoir complexes are absent or less monumental. The positioning of major tanks near the citadel suggests that water security may have been linked to administrative or elite authority. Control over stored water would have had economic and political implications, particularly during periods of drought. Sediment studies and geomorphological analyses indicate that Dholavira experienced environmental shifts over its occupation. There is evidence of declining rainfall and increasing aridity in the later phases of the Indus civilization. The city's expansion of reservoir capacity over time may represent adaptive responses to these changes. Rather than abandoning the site at the first sign of climatic stress, the inhabitants invested in increasingly complex water infrastructure. This suggests an empirical understanding of seasonal cycles and long-term hydrological trends. The ability to calculate gradients for channel flow, prevent erosion, and manage sediment accumulation demonstrates practical engineering knowledge accumulated across generations. Dholavira is also known for the discovery of a large inscription composed of Indus script signs mounted on a wooden board found near one of the gateways. Although the script remains undeciphered, its presence indicates administrative activity and symbolic communication within the urban center. While no surviving text explains the reservoir system, the scale of construction implies organized labor and possibly institutional oversight. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, where textual sources describe irrigation works, the Indus civilization left no deciphered records detailing hydraulic policy. Therefore, interpretation relies entirely on material evidence. In Dholavira's case, the archaeological record clearly indicates intentional large-scale water governance embedded in urban planning. By around 1500 BCE, Dholavira was largely abandoned. Archaeological layers show gradual depopulation rather than sudden destruction. Climatic factors, particularly the weakening of the monsoon and the desiccation of regional water sources, are widely considered major contributors to the broader decline of the Indus civilization. The irony is instructive. Even one of the most advanced water management systems of the Bronze Age had limits. As environmental stress intensified beyond manageable thresholds, the infrastructure may no longer have been sufficient to sustain dense urban life. The decline of Dholavira illustrates both the ingenuity and vulnerability of early complex societies dependent on climate-sensitive resources. Dholavira's reservoir complex stands out within South Asian archaeology for several reasons. It represents one of the earliest known examples of a fully integrated urban water harvesting and storage system in a semi-arid environment. The scale and masonry quality demonstrate advanced planning and skilled craftsmanship. The integration of hydraulic and defensive architecture reveals a holistic approach to city design. The system provides insight into how the Indus civilization adapted to ecological constraints without reliance on large perennial rivers. Recognition of Dholavira as a UNESCO World Heritage Site underscores its global significance. The giant reservoir gates are not isolated architectural curiosities. They are components of a broader technological strategy that sustained an urban population for centuries under challenging environmental conditions. The Dholavira reservoir gates and associated hydraulic works constitute one of the most substantial bodies of archaeological evidence for water engineering in the Bronze Age. They demonstrate deliberate planning, environmental adaptation, and institutional coordination within the Indus Valley civilization. Far from being speculative or mysterious in a sensational sense, their importance lies in what they concretely reveal: a society capable of large-scale infrastructure development, precise masonry construction, and long-term hydrological management in a region defined by scarcity. For scholars of ancient urbanism, climate adaptation, and early engineering, Dholavira provides a case study grounded in material data. Its reservoirs are not merely architectural remnants, they are enduring records of how one of the world's earliest urban civilizations confronted and managed the fundamental challenge of water security. High above the modern city of Nashik, carved into the dark basalt face of the Trirashmi Hills, the Pandavleni caves stand as one of the most revealing archives of early Indian religious life. At first glance, they appear austere rows of rock-cut facades overlooking the plains below. Yet within these excavated chambers lies a record of how Buddhism, commerce, political authority, and craftsmanship intertwined more than 2 millennia ago. The caves were excavated between roughly the 2nd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. This places them in a formative era of Buddhism, when monastic communities were consolidating their institutional presence across the Deccan Plateau. Unlike later cave complexes rich in sculptural imagery, many of the earliest Pandavleni caves belong to the Hinayana tradition, in which the Buddha was not depicted in anthropomorphic form. Instead, devotion centered on symbolic representations such as stupas, rail patterns, and sacred spaces designed for meditation and communal recitation. This absence of Buddha statues is not a loss, but a clue. It marks a theological phase before image worship became widespread, preserving a moment in doctrinal evolution that later monuments would obscure. The complex consists of approximately 24 excavations, primarily viharas, monastic residences, and chaitya halls, prayer halls. Each was carved directly into volcanic basalt. There was no additive construction. Artisans removed stone to create space. This subtractive architecture required careful planning. Once a section of rock was removed incorrectly, it could not be restored. Columns, ceilings, benches, and facades had to be measured in advance, accounting for the structural integrity of the remaining mass. The basalt of the Deccan is hard and unforgiving, yet the surviving pillars stand proportionate, their surfaces smoothed and aligned with remarkable precision. Among the most significant caves is Cave 18, a large vihara with an impressive veranda supported by pillars. Inside, a central hall opens into individual monastic cells, each cut with functional austerity. The geometry is practical rather than ornamental, emphasizing communal life and disciplined routine. Other caves display varying degrees of elaboration, reflecting different patrons and phases of expansion. This diversity allows historians to trace stylistic transitions over time. One of the most valuable aspects of the Pandavleni caves is their inscriptions. Numerous records in early Brahmi script are carved on facades and interior walls. These inscriptions identify donors, kings, officials, merchants, guild members, and even women of status who financed specific excavations or architectural elements. They provide rare documentary evidence for the social networks that sustained Buddhist monasticism. Through these texts, the caves become more than architectural achievements. They become a ledger of relationships. Several inscriptions reference rulers associated with the Satavahana dynasty, the major power controlling much of the Deccan during this period. The Satavahanas were instrumental in facilitating long-distance trade routes, linking western coastal ports to inland markets. Nashik lay strategically along these arteries of commerce. Caravans carrying textiles, spices, semi-precious stones, and other goods would have passed nearby. Merchants frequently endowed monastic institutions both as acts of merit and as investments in stable rest stops along trade corridors. The location of Pandavleni overlooking fertile land and transport pathways was therefore economically rational as well as spiritually meaningful. This intersection of trade and religion is critical to understanding the caves. Buddhism in this era expanded not solely through royal patronage, but through mercantile sponsorship. Monasteries provided safe lodging, ethical legitimacy, and a network of educated intermediaries. In return, traders contributed resources for excavation and maintenance. The inscriptions at Pandavleni document this reciprocal system in concrete detail. They name individuals, cite family lineages, and sometimes specify the purpose of the donation. Few ancient religious sites offer such transparent evidence of funding structures. Architecturally, the caves also reveal the adaptation of earlier wooden building traditions into stone. Elements such as ribbed ceilings and column capitals echo timber prototypes. In rock-cut form, these features became permanent. The translation from wood to basalt demonstrates not only technical skill but conceptual continuity. Artisans were not inventing entirely new forms. They were fossilizing architectural memory. As centuries passed, changes in doctrine are visible within the complex. Later caves introduce anthropomorphic images of the Buddha, indicating the rise of Mahayana influences. This layered development, symbolic spaces, followed by image-based devotion, makes Pandavleni a stratified archive of religious transformation. Rather than a single moment frozen in time, the site represents continuity and adaptation. The popular name Pandavleni, meaning Caves of the Pandavas, reflects a much later layer of interpretation. Local tradition associated the caves with heroes of the Mahabharata epic. While there is no archaeological evidence supporting such a link, the attribution illustrates how communities reinterpret ancient spaces through mythic frameworks. This renaming process is itself part of the site's historical trajectory, showing how memory evolves. From a technical standpoint, the logistics of excavation remain impressive. Workers had to coordinate quarrying teams, manage debris removal on steep terrain, and maintain consistent alignment across multiple chambers. Iron tools would have been essential, and sustained labor over decades was required. The uniformity of certain facades suggests skilled oversight rather than ad hoc carving. Moreover, the durability of the caves, withstanding monsoon cycles and temperature fluctuations, attest to accurate geological judgment in selecting excavation zones. For scholars of early Indian history, Pandavleni offers interdisciplinary value. Epigraphists analyze the Brahmi inscriptions to refine chronological frameworks. Art historians examine stylistic parallels with other Western Deccan cave sites, such as Kala and Bhaja. Economic historians use the donor lists to reconstruct trade patterns. Religious studies scholars trace doctrinal developments. The caves function as a convergence point for these lines of inquiry. What distinguishes Pandavleni is not monumental scale, but documentary clarity. Many ancient monuments inspire awe yet remain silent about their creators. Here, the creators speak through inscriptions. We know their names, their affiliations, and sometimes their intentions. This transforms the caves from anonymous relics into socially grounded artifacts. In practical terms, the site demonstrates how infrastructure belief and mobility were interdependent in ancient India. Monasteries thrived where trade routes converged. Political authority reinforced economic corridors. Religious patronage strengthened social legitimacy. The basalt hills of Nashik thus preserve not only meditative chambers, but the architecture of an interconnected world. Standing within a vihara cell, one senses disciplined simplicity rather than extravagance. The space was designed for reflection study and communal cohesion, yet outside the cell walls, inscriptions testify to dynamic external engagement. The monk in meditation and the merchant on caravan were linked by shared structures of support. This synergy contributed to Buddhism's endurance across regions. Today, the Pandavleni caves remain a protected archaeological site. Weathering has softened some details, but the essential forms persist. Visitors walking along the hillside encounter a sequence of excavations that gradually reveal chronological progression. Each doorway is an entry into both physical and textual space. Ultimately, the value of Pandavleni lies in its capacity to bridge abstraction and evidence. It grounds discussions of early Buddhism in tangible data. It clarifies the mechanics of patronage. It showcases engineering competence in a pre-modern context. Most importantly, it reminds us that ancient religious institutions were not isolated spiritual enclaves. They were embedded within economic systems and political realities. In the dark basalt walls of Pandavleni stone becomes narrative. The caves are not mysterious because they defy explanation. They are compelling because they document a sophisticated society negotiating faith, commerce, and craftsmanship with remarkable coherence. More than 2,000 years later, their carved chambers continue to offer insight not only into how they were built, but into how communities once organized their world. The cemetery known as R37 at Rakhigarhi is one of the most important burial grounds associated with the urban phase of the Indus Valley Civilization ca. 2600 to 1900 BCE. Located in present-day Haryana, India, Rakhigarhi is among the largest Harappan urban centers identified to date, comparable in scale to Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. While much public attention has focused on Harappan urban planning and trade networks, cemetery R37 provides direct biological and cultural evidence about the people themselves, their mortuary practices, health, genetic ancestry, and social structure. This burial ground is significant, not because it contains monumental tombs or royal chambers, but because it reflects a standardized, community-based mortuary tradition embedded within a highly organized urban society. Archaeological excavations have revealed extended inhumation burials, typically with the body laid supine. Grave orientation appears consistent within the cemetery, suggesting regulated ritual practice. The absence of monumental differentiation, no pyramidal tombs, no elite mausoleums, indicates that social hierarchy, if present, was not expressed through extreme funerary display. Grave goods recovered from R37 include pottery vessels, shell bangles, semi-precious stone beads, notably carnelian and agate, and occasional copper objects. The pottery aligns typologically with mature Harappan ceramic traditions, redware with black-painted motifs, standardized shapes, and controlled firing techniques. The presence of ornaments and personal items suggests beliefs in an afterlife or symbolic provisioning of the deceased. However, the relatively modest scale of grave assemblages compared to contemporaneous Mesopotamian or Egyptian burials indicates a different ideological framework. Mortuary investment appears measured and regulated rather than competitive. One of the most scientifically significant aspects of R37 concerns ancient DNA analysis conducted on skeletal remains recovered from the site. Genetic data obtained from a burial at Rakhigarhi has contributed to broader debates about population formation in South Asia. Published analyses indicate that the sampled individual lacked detectable steppe pastoralist-related ancestry that later became associated with Indo-European language expansions in the subcontinent during the 2nd millennium BCE. Instead, the genetic profile reflects a mixture of ancestry related to ancient Iranian agricultural populations and deeply rooted South Asian hunter-gatherer lineages. This finding has important implications. It supports the view that the core population of the mature Harappan urban phase developed largely from regional genetic substrates rather than being established by intrusive steppe groups. It also suggests that major steppe-associated gene flow into northern India occurred after the decline of the Indus urban system. While conclusions must remain cautious given the limited number of sequenced individuals, the Rakhigarhi data represents one of the clearest genomic windows into Harappan biological ancestry. Bioarchaeological study of the skeletal remains from R37 provides additional insight into health and lifestyle. Analysis indicates a population accustomed to agricultural subsistence with evidence of repetitive physical labor consistent with craft production or farming activities. Dental wear patterns suggest a grain-based diet, likely including wheat and barley. Instances of dental caries and enamel hyperplasia indicate periodic nutritional stress, though not at catastrophic levels. Importantly, skeletal trauma patterns do not demonstrate widespread interpersonal violence. There is no clear osteological evidence of large-scale warfare massacre or systemic violent collapse in this cemetery population. The lack of mass graves or burn layers associated with destruction contrasts sharply with violent end scenarios proposed for other ancient societies. Archaeological layers across multiple Harappan sites, including Rakhigarhi, do not consistently show widespread burning fortification breaches or weapon concentrations. This absence of evidence has increasingly shifted scholarly focus away from invasion theories toward environmental and systemic explanations for urban decline. Hydrological and paleo-environmental research suggests that changes in river systems played a central role in the transformation of the Indus urban network. Many settlements in the Gagga-Hakra region, including Rakhigarhi, were likely sustained by river systems that experienced reduction or reorganization during the late 3rd and early 2nd millennium BCE. Monsoon weakening tectonic shifts affecting river channels and gradual aridification may have undermined agricultural stability. Rather than a sudden collapse, the archaeological record suggests a process of deurbanization. Cities were gradually abandoned or reduced. Populations dispersed eastward, and settlement patterns shifted towards smaller rural communities. Cemetery R37 is chronologically positioned within this broader transformation. Its burials reflect the standardized mortuary ideology of the mature Harappan phase, yet it exists within a landscape that would soon undergo demographic and economic restructuring. The cemetery, therefore, captures a society at or near the peak of its urban organization before large-scale fragmentation occurred. Another notable feature of R37 is the absence of extreme social stratification markers. Unlike royal tomb complexes in Egypt or elite shaft graves in Mesopotamia, Rakhigarhi's cemetery does not present dramatic wealth disparity in burial context. This observation aligns with broader patterns. In Harappan archaeology, urban planning was highly standardized. Brick proportions were uniform, drainage systems were distributed across residential areas, and elite palatial architecture remains ambiguous. While differences in housing size and craft specialization indicate some degree of social differentiation, the material record does not reveal the kind of rigid, centralized monarchic display seen elsewhere in the Bronze Age world. The cemetery also contributes to understanding Harappan ritual behavior. The consistent burial orientation and inclusion of pottery may reflect shared cosmological concepts. However, no deciphered written texts exist to clarify Harappan religious beliefs. The Indus script remains undeciphered, and no long bilingual inscriptions have been recovered. As a result, cemeteries like R37 function as primary interpretive sources for reconstructing worldview and social norms. Isotopic studies from broader Harappan contexts indicate patterns of local mobility, with some individuals showing non-local signatures suggesting interaction between settlements. Whether R37 includes migrants from other Harappan cities remains under study, but the scale of Rakhigarhi implies participation in long-distance trade networks that connected the Indus region with Mesopotamia, the Iranian plateau, and coastal Gujarat. Carnelian bead production, shell ornament manufacturing, and standardized weights reflect integration into a sophisticated economic system. The decline of that system after 1900 BCE did not result in total cultural disappearance. Material traditions evolved rather than vanished. Later, South Asian cultural developments show continuity in agricultural practices, settlement location patterns, and certain craft traditions. Genetic data likewise suggests population continuity rather than replacement. The evidence from R37 supports a model in which the urban phase ended, but the people persisted adapting to new ecological and economic realities. From an archaeological perspective, the importance of Rakhigarhi Cemetery, R37, lies in its integration of multiple lines of evidence: mortuary archaeology, osteology, paleogenomics, environmental reconstruction, and settlement analysis. It anchors debates about Indo-European migrations, challenges simplistic invasion, collapse narratives, and contributes to a nuanced understanding of how complex urban systems transform under environmental stress. Unlike monumental tombs that emphasize kings and conquest R37 centers ordinary urban inhabitants, it provides measurable data about diet, ancestry, health, ritual, and demographic stability. Its evidence suggests that the Indus urban decline was neither a catastrophic annihilation nor an externally imposed conquest, but a structural reorganization shaped by climatic shifts and internal adaptation. Cemetery R37 therefore represents more than a burial ground. It is a dataset, biological, cultural, and environmental, preserved in stratified soil. It demonstrates that the Indus civilization was built by a population deeply rooted in the subcontinent, organized around standardized civic planning rather than overt royal display, and ultimately transformed through gradual ecological and economic pressures rather than abrupt military destruction. For understanding South Asian prehistory, Rakigarhi is indispensable. It bridges urban archaeology with genetic science, replacing speculation with evidence-based reconstruction. As further excavations and genomic studies continue, Cemetery R37 will remain central to clarifying how one of the world's earliest urban civilizations emerged stabilized and ultimately reorganized into new cultural forms without leaving behind the dramatic destruction layers that characterize so many other ancient collapses. The Hili 8 circular tomb is one of the most significant Bronze Age funerary monuments in southeastern Arabia. Located within Hili Archaeological Park in Al Ain, United Arab Emirates, the structure dates to approximately 2500 to 2000 BCE and belongs to the archaeological horizon known as the al-Nar culture. Excavations at Hili have provided crucial evidence for understanding early complex societies in the Oman Peninsula during the 3rd millennium BCE. Far from being an isolated tomb, Hili 8 reflects advanced architectural planning, social organization, long-distance trade integration, and evolving mortuary traditions. The al-Nar period, named after excavations conducted on al-Nar Island near Abu Dhabi in the 1950s, represents a transformative phase in Arabian prehistory. It followed the earlier Hafid period and preceded the Wadi Suk period. Archaeologically, the al-Nar phase is characterized by circular stone tombs, fortified settlements, craft specialization, and participation in interregional exchange networks linking Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Iran. Radiocarbon dating and associated material culture place Hili 8 securely within this cultural framework. The site of Hili itself contains settlement remains, irrigation evidence, and multiple tomb structures, indicating that it functioned as a permanent and organized community, rather than a transient encampment. Hili 8 is a circular above-ground tomb, approximately 12 meters in diameter. The monument was constructed using finely cut limestone blocks, arranged in 2 concentric rings, forming a carefully engineered cylindrical structure. The exterior walls display a high degree of masonry precision, with stones shaped and fitted to create stable courses without reliance on advanced mortar systems. The structure originally consisted of multiple internal burial chambers arranged radially. These chambers were accessed through controlled entry points, and the internal organization suggests planned construction rather than incremental addition. The engineering implications are significant. Constructing a symmetrical circular monument of this scale required geometric planning, labor coordination, and knowledge of load distribution. The durability of the tomb over 4 millennia indicates an understanding of structural stability in a desert environment subject to temperature variation and erosion. The construction techniques seen at Hili 8 align with other high-quality al-Nar tombs, but represent one of the most refined examples. One of the distinguishing features of Hili 8 is its carved stone facade. Relief panels depict human figures and animals, particularly oryx and other fauna native to the region. These carvings are not merely decorative, they reflect iconographic choices that may relate to identity status, subsistence economy, or ritual symbolism. The inclusion of figural representations is noteworthy because it signals investment in monumentality beyond purely functional burial needs. Producing carved limestone panels required skilled artisans' planning and surplus resources. The existence of such craftsmanship implies a degree of social differentiation and the presence of individuals or groups capable of commissioning large-scale funerary architecture. Although the precise symbolic meaning of the imagery remains debated, it demonstrates that al-Nar communities possessed developed artistic traditions and shared visual language. Excavations inside Hili 8 revealed multiple human remains, indicating that the structure functioned as a collective tomb. Rather than serving a single individual, the monument was used over time to intermembers of a kin group or elite segment of society. Osteological analysis suggests repeated access to the tomb, implying ongoing ritual engagement with ancestors. Collective burial architecture of this scale suggests structured lineage systems and concepts of shared ancestry. The effort invested in constructing and maintaining such monuments indicates that burial practices were socially significant and likely tied to land claims, status continuity, and community cohesion. The presence of grave goods, including ceramics and imported materials, reinforces the interpretation that the individuals buried here belonged to a socially prominent group. Material evidence from Hili and related al-Nar sites demonstrates participation in long-distance trade. Artifacts such as Mesopotamian pottery, Indus-style beads, and copper materials indicate sustained exchange relationships across the Arabian Gulf. During the 3rd millennium, BCE Mesopotamian texts refer to a land called Magan, widely identified with the Oman Peninsula. Magan was known as a source of copper and diorite. The economic prosperity associated with copper production likely supported the development of permanent settlements and monumental tomb construction. Hili's location near oases would have supported agriculture through early irrigation systems, providing food stability alongside trade-based wealth. The combination of agricultural production, metallurgy, and maritime exchange created the economic foundation for architectural projects such as Hili 8. The stoneworking precision evident in Hili 8 reflects established quarrying and shaping techniques. Bronze tools, copper implements, and abrasion methods would have been employed to shape limestone blocks. The regularity of the masonry suggests standardized methods rather than improvised construction. Furthermore, building a circular monument required geometric awareness and planning. Achieving consistent curvature over a 12-meter diameter demands spatial coordination and surveying techniques. While not advanced in a modern sense, these capabilities demonstrate technical proficiency consistent with other Bronze Age complex societies. Circular tombs are a hallmark of the al-Nar period found across the UAE and northern Oman. However, Hili 8 stands out for its scale, preservation, and decorative program. Compared with earlier Hafid tombs, typically smaller and simpler beehive structures, the al-Nar tombs show clear architectural evolution. This shift suggests increasing social complexity and resource mobilization. Monumental funerary architecture often correlates with emerging hierarchy, territorial stability, and long-term settlement patterns. Around 2000 BCE, the archaeological record indicates changes associated with the transition to the Wadi-Suku period. Tomb architecture shifts from large circular monuments to elongated lower-profile collective graves. Settlement patterns also change, possibly reflecting climatic fluctuations, shifts in trade routes, or internal socio-political transformation. There is no evidence of abrupt collapse. Rather, the transition appears gradual. Nevertheless, the large circular tomb tradition, including monuments like Hili 8, ceased to be constructed. The reasons remain subjects of ongoing archaeological research. Hili 8 is important not only as an architectural achievement, but as a data source. Excavations have provided information about diet health trade connections, craft specialization, and mortuary ideology. The monument contributes to a broader understanding of how societies in arid environments developed complexity through trade integration and oasis agriculture. Its preservation within Hili Archaeological Park allows for continued study and public education. As one of the best preserved examples of al-Nar funerary architecture, it anchors discussions about early state formation processes in Arabia and the peninsula's integration into wider Bronze Age networks. The Hili 8 circular tomb represents a convergence of engineering skill, social organization, economic integration, and ritual practice in 3rd millennium BCE Arabia. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that the communities of the al-Nar period were not peripheral or isolated, but actively engaged in regional exchange systems while developing distinctive architectural traditions. Rather than being interpreted as a mysterious anomaly, Hili 8 should be understood as a product of a structured, economically connected, and technically capable society. Its circular geometry-carved facades, collective burial system, and durable masonry provide measurable evidence of cultural sophistication. As research continues, Hili 8 remains a key reference point for reconstructing the development of early complex societies in southeastern Arabia and for situating the Oman Peninsula within the broader narrative of the Bronze Age world.